I emptied my life savings to give my son the future he always wanted. Just a few months later, I found his 7-month pregnant wife serving tables through double shifts at a rundown diner. When she finally broke down and told me where my money had actually gone, I knew our family would never recover. If you think giving your last dime to your own flesh and blood guarantees their loyalty, you need to hear my story. My name is Jerome. I am 65 years old, a retired firefighter battalion chief, originally from the south side of Chicago. For 35 years, I ran into burning buildings. I pulled terrified people out of smoke-filled rooms, watched roofs collapse inches from my face, and faced down heat that could melt the skin right off your bones. I learned early on that you can fight a physical fire. You can douse it, contain it, and eventually extinguish it. But nothing, and I mean absolutely nothing, prepared me for the invisible fire that burned down my own family from the inside out. Today, I live in a quiet, tree-lined suburb in Georgia. It is a peaceful place, the kind of town where people wave from their porches, the tea is always sweet, and the tall pine trees block out the heavy noise of the city. I moved down here to find some peace in my twilight years, after a lifetime of sirens and chaos. But peace is a very fragile thing, especially when the person holding the match is your own son. Everything I ever did, I did for my family. My wife and I were high school sweethearts. We built a beautiful life together, scraping by in the early days, saving every extra penny and putting our son Cameron above all else. But life is rarely fair. 5 years ago, I lost my beautiful wife to breast cancer. The sickness took her fast, leaving me in a house that suddenly felt 10 times too big and entirely too quiet. After she passed, my world shrank. My sole focus, my entire reason for waking up in the morning, became Cameron. He was my pride and joy, the living legacy of the woman I loved. I wanted him to have the kind of smooth, unburdened life that his mother and I had to fight tooth and nail to achieve. When Cameron met Chloe, I truly thanked the Lord. Chloe is a sweet, hardworking white woman from a modest blue-collar family in Ohio. She had this bright, genuine smile that could light up a room and a heart of pure gold. She loved Cameron deeply, looking at him like he hung the moon and stars. Moreover, she treated me with the kind of respect and warmth you always pray for in a daughter-in-law. She would come over on Sundays, help me in the kitchen, and listen to my old firehouse stories without ever checking her watch. I could not have been happier or more proud when they tied the knot in a beautiful, simple ceremony down by the lake. I remember the exact afternoon Cameron came to me with his big dream. It was late spring, and we were sitting on my back patio, the ceiling fan stirring the warm Georgia air. He looked me in the eye, full of that youthful, ambitious fire, and pitched his business plan. He wanted to open a premium physical therapy clinic downtown. He had the degree, he had the vision, but he lacked the capital. The banks were asking for too much collateral, the interest rates were sky high, and he was visibly stressed, running his hands through his hair as he laid out the spreadsheets on my patio table. Then he dropped the real news. He told me that Chloe was pregnant with their first child, my first grandchild. My heart swelled so much I thought it might burst. He explained that he wanted to buy a beautiful, spacious home in a safe, upscale neighborhood so his growing family would never have to worry about a thing. He wanted to provide for them right from the start. To do all of this, to secure the commercial lease, buy the medical equipment, and put the down payment on the house, he needed $150,000. That was no small change. That was my entire nest egg. It was the money my late wife and I had scrimped and saved over decades of missed holidays, overtime shifts, and frugal living. To hand over that kind of cash, I had to take a massive penalty hit on my pension and completely empty my retirement accounts. I would be living strictly month to month on a fixed income for the rest of my life. But looking across the table at my son, thinking about my unborn grandchild, and the sweet woman who was going to be a mother. I did not even hesitate. A father is supposed to provide. A father is supposed to sacrifice. I signed the withdrawal papers, wired the funds directly to his account, and essentially handed him the keys to his future. I thought I was laying the solid foundation for a family legacy. I did not realize I was actually digging my own grave. For the first couple of months, everything seemed perfectly fine. Cameron called me every single week. He talked excitedly about signing the commercial lease, ordering top-of-the-line rehabilitation equipment, and hunting for the perfect 4-bedroom house in a gated community. I would sit on my porch, listening to his voice, feeling a deep sense of pride. Then the shift happened. It was subtle at first. The weekly calls started getting shorter. He would rush me off the phone claiming he had another urgent meeting with contractors or an unmissable appointment with an angel investor. Soon, the weekly calls turned into sporadic bi-weekly texts. By the time autumn rolled around and the leaves started changing color, I was lucky to get a one-word reply to my messages. Whenever I finally managed to get him on the line, he sounded irritated, like my very existence was a burden to his busy schedule. He claimed the clinic launch was an absolute nightmare, requiring him to work 80-hour weeks. He said he was exhausted, financially stressed, trying to manage payroll, and just needed time to get the business completely off the ground. I gave him the benefit of the doubt. I know what backbreaking hard work looks like. I know what it takes to build something meaningful from scratch. So I swallowed my loneliness, stepped back, and gave him the space he asked for. But a dark, nagging unease started to settle deep in the pit of my stomach. It was that same gut instinct I used to get right before a burning roof gave way. Something did not feel right. That quiet unease turned into a blaring, deafening alarm bell on Thanksgiving. I had invited them over to my place for dinner weeks in advance. I spent 2 full days preparing. I smoked a turkey out back, slow-cooked collard greens with smoked turkey necks, baked macaroni and cheese, and made the exact sweet potato pie recipe my late wife used to make. The dining room table was beautifully set. The house smelled like cherished memories and warmth, and I sat on the front porch waiting for their fancy new car to pull into the driveway. When a car finally arrived, it was not a new luxury vehicle. It was Chloe driving her old beat-up sedan that rattled as it idled. She stepped out of the driver's side door, and my heart absolutely broke right there on the wooden steps of my porch. She was heavily pregnant, about 6 months along at that point, but she looked like a walking ghost. Her skin was pale and drawn tight over her cheekbones. Her eyes were surrounded by deep, bruised-looking dark circles, and she was so alarmingly thin that her faded maternity dress hung off her shoulders like an old, discarded rag. This was not the glowing, happy-rested mother-to-be that I expected to see living in a luxury home with a highly successful husband. She looked entirely broken. I hurried down the steps to help her inside, wrapping my arm around her frail shoulders. I immediately asked her where Cameron was. She stiffened. She could not bring herself to look me in the eye. She stared down at her scuffed, worn-out shoes and mumbled that Cameron had a massive, unexpected emergency at the clinic. On Thanksgiving Day, a sudden, unresolvable emergency at a physical therapy clinic. The excuse was so incredibly flimsy and absurd that it practically disintegrated in the cold air between us. I did not push it. I brought her inside and sat her down at the table. Throughout dinner, I watched her closely. She ate ravenously, shoveling food onto her plate, like someone who had not seen a hot, home-cooked meal in days. Her hands physically trembled when she picked up her fork. She tried so hard to force a polite smile, tried to ask me about my garden and my neighbors, but the sheer exhaustion radiating off her body was palpable. She looked like a desperate woman carrying the weight of the entire world, terrified that if she dropped it for even a second, everything around her would shatter into a million pieces. I tried to gently pry, keeping my voice light and casual. I asked her how the new house was coming along. She swallowed hard, took a long sip of ice water, and gave a vague, rehearsed answer about still unpacking boxes and waiting for furniture to be delivered. I asked her how the clinic was doing. She repeated Cameron's exact lines almost robotically, stating that the business was absolutely booming and they were just overwhelmed with high-paying clients. But her eyes told a completely different story. They were wide with a silent, desperate panic. If the business was truly booming, why was she driving a car with a cracked windshield and a sputtering engine? If they had just dropped a fortune on a premium house, why did she look like she had not slept in a proper bed for weeks? Why were her fingernails chipped and her hands red and raw? I am an old firefighter. My entire career, my very survival was built on reading the environment. You learn to look for the hidden signs of danger, the subtle discoloration of smoke, the faint bowing of a wall before the floor gives out completely beneath you. The smoke was incredibly thick in my dining room that afternoon, even if there was no visible flame to point to. When the meal was over and it was time for her to leave, I walked her back out to her rattling car. I hugged her tight, feeling her small, trembling frame against mine, and I slipped a crisp $100 bill into the pocket of her thin coat. I told her to buy something nice for the baby, something just from her grandfather. She froze completely. She pulled the bill out of her pocket and stared at it as if it were $1 million. Her lower lip quivered, and a single heavy tear slipped down her pale cheek. She quickly wiped it away, plastered on a brave, fake smile, and thanked me profusely before getting into the car and driving off into the dark night. I stood alone in my driveway for a very long time, watching her dim taillights disappear down the street. The cold November wind cut straight through my jacket, but the icy chill inside my chest was far worse. The money I had sacrificed everything for was gone. My son was hiding behind a wall of lies. His pregnant wife was practically starving. A massive, destructive storm was brewing on the horizon, and I knew with absolute certainty that I was about to walk right into the dead center of it. A couple of weeks dragged by after that incredibly strained Thanksgiving dinner, but the bitter taste of suspicion refused to wash out of my mouth. Every morning, I would sit on my front porch with my black coffee staring out at the quiet Georgia pines, trying to make sense of the tangled web my son had spun. I kept telling myself that I was just a paranoid old man, that I was reading too much into Chloe's exhaustion, that starting a premium physical therapy clinic downtown was taking a massive toll on them both. But the math in my head was not adding up, and the deep feeling in my gut kept me awake at night. It was a miserable, pouring down rainy Tuesday in mid-December when the universe decided to finally rip the blinders off my eyes. I had to drive 2 towns over to a wholesale supply yard to pick up some discounted building materials for a buddy of mine. When you live strictly month to month on a fixed income because you handed your entire life savings and a huge chunk of your firefighting pension over to your son, you swallow your pride and take whatever cash side jobs you can get just to keep the lights on and the refrigerator stocked. I was driving my old reliable Ford pickup down a stretch of lonely winding highway. The sky above was a bruised, angry purple, and the rain came down so hard the windshield wipers could barely keep up. I was lost in my own heavy thoughts, mentally calculating how many groceries I could afford that week, when the engine suddenly gave a harsh, violent, metal-grinding stutter. My dashboard lit up instantly. Before I could even pump the brakes, the truck completely died, losing all power steering and momentum. I wrestled the heavy wheel with all my upper body strength, managing to coast onto the muddy gravel shoulder just as the rain started coming down in heavy, blinding sheets. I sat there, in the sudden, eerie silence of the cab, listening to the rain hammer relentlessly against the thin metal roof. I am an old firefighter. I spent 35 years around heavy machinery, I know my way around an engine, but popping the hood in that kind of freezing downpour was a fool's errand. I tried turning the key 3 or 4 more times, but the engine just clicked uselessly. I pulled out my cell phone and called a local towing company. The gruff dispatcher told me that because of the severe storm, it would be at least 2.5 hours before a truck could reach my location. The cold was already starting to seep through the rusty floorboards, settling deep into my aching knees. I zipped up my heavy canvas jacket, rubbing my calloused hands together for warmth. About a 1/4 mile up the road, faintly glowing through the thick curtain of rain, I saw the flickering, buzzing neon sign of a rundown 24-hour diner. It was the only sign of civilization and light for miles. I knew I could not sit in a freezing metal box for 2 hours, so I grabbed my keys, pulled my collar up high over my neck, and made a run for it through the storm. By the time I pushed my way through the heavy grease-smudged glass doors of that diner, I was soaked completely to the bone and shivering uncontrollably. A small brass bell chimed a sad, dull note above my head. The place immediately assaulted my senses. It smelled heavily of burnt drip coffee, old frying grease, and damp winter coats. The faded linoleum floor was cracked and peeling. The red vinyl booths were heavily patched with silver duct tape, and the handful of scattered patrons looked just as tired and beaten down by life as the building itself. I found an empty quiet booth near the back corner, slid onto the squeaky seat, and tried to wipe the rainwater from my face. A grumpy-looking cook behind the long counter yelled out an order number, the harsh sound piercing the low, constant hum of the old refrigerators. I kept my head down, trying to shake the deep chill from my bones. My mind inevitably drifted right back to Cameron. I had tried calling my son twice that week, but he sent me straight to voicemail both times. His prolonged silence was becoming a heavy, suffocating weight on my chest. I signaled a passing server for a cup of black coffee, desperately needing something to warm my blood while I waited for the tow truck. While I sat waiting for my drink, blowing warm air into my hands, the heavy metal swinging doors leading to the kitchen were kicked open. A waitress backed out into the dining room, struggling to balance an overloaded plastic tray of dirty dishes on her right shoulder. The dark brown tray was stacked dangerously high with thick ceramic plates, half-eaten greasy food, crumpled napkins, and thick glass coffee mugs. From where I sat in the back corner booth, I could only see her from behind. She wore a faded, oversized pink uniform dress that looked like it had been washed 100 times too many, paired with cheap, non-slip black shoes that were scuffed and worn down at the heels. But what immediately caught my eye, what made my chest tighten with a sudden, sharp, protective instinct, was that this laboring woman was heavily pregnant. She walked with that distinct, heavy-footed waddle of a mother, deep into her third trimester. Her small shoulders slumped drastically under the crushing, unbalanced weight of the massive tray. Her lower spine curved in a way that looked incredibly painful, her body physically fighting to carry the load while protecting the baby in her belly. I watched her slowly and agonizingly navigate the narrow, cramped aisle between the tables. Her steps were cautious, slow, and unsteady on the slippery, grease-stained floor. She looked like she was carrying the absolute weight of the entire world on her fragile back. I felt a sudden surge of intense, righteous anger toward whatever cheap, abusive manager was forcing a woman 7 months along in her pregnancy to haul that kind of back-breaking physical load. It was flat-out cruel and dangerous. My entire career was built on helping people in distress. I was just about to slide out of my booth to walk over there and offer to carry that heavy tray for her when she finally reached the front counter. She turned her head slightly to the left to carefully slide the towering stack of dirty dishes into a gray plastic bus tub. In that exact second, the harsh, flickering fluorescent lights of the diner hit her profile, illuminating her face completely. My heart completely stopped beating in my chest. The steady rhythm of my pulse flatlined. All the air in the room was violently sucked right out of my lungs. I blinked hard aggressively, rubbing my tired eyes, praying to the Lord above that my old failing vision was just playing a cruel, twisted trick on me in the dim diner light. But it was not a trick. It was a nightmare standing right in front of me in the flesh. The woman in the faded pink uniform, the heavily pregnant woman, carrying back breaking loads of dirty dishes in a run-down, dangerous roadside diner 2 towns over, was my sweet daughter-in-law. It was Chloe. My mind violently rejected what I was seeing with my own 2 eyes. This was logically and financially impossible. Chloe was supposed to be resting her swollen feet in a beautiful, sprawling 4-bedroom home in an upscale, gated community. She was supposed to be safely married to a highly successful physical therapist running a booming premium clinic downtown. She was absolutely not supposed to be working grueling double shifts on her feet, serving bad food to tired truckers in the middle of a freezing, dangerous winter storm. But as I sat frozen in that booth and stared at her, the devastating, horrifying reality crashed down on my shoulders like a collapsed, burning roof. She looked infinitely worse than she had at our Thanksgiving dinner. She was shockingly gaunt, her cheekbones jutting out sharply and painfully under her pale, bruised-looking skin. Her beautiful, bright blonde hair was tied back in a messy, greasy knot, with loose, damp strands clinging to her sweaty, exhausted forehead. Her hands were visibly red raw and shaking uncontrollably as she rapidly stacked the heavy ceramic plates into the bin. She looked completely and utterly broken, a hollowed-out, empty shell of the bright, smiling, hopeful girl my son had married down by the lake. The sheer physical toll on her fragile body was terrifying to witness. She paused for a single second, leaning her heavy weight against the dirty counter, closing her eyes tightly in obvious agony as she reached back to massage her swollen lower back. A wave of physical nausea hit me so hard I had to grip the metal edges of the diner table to keep myself from falling out of the booth. The $150,000. My entire life savings. The money I sacrificed my secure retirement for. Where was it? If my son was supposedly making a fortune, why was his pregnant wife practically killing herself in a diner? I could not sit hiding in the shadows of that booth for another second. The mountain of sickening lies Cameron had been feeding me collapsed right in front of my eyes, igniting a hot, burning fury deep in my belly. Someone was severely hurting this innocent girl and my unborn grandchild. The undeniable truth, pointing directly at my own flesh and blood, was a bitter pill I was suddenly forced to swallow. I pushed myself out of the booth, my heavy boots thudding loudly against the sticky linoleum floor. The anger, betrayal, and deep confusion swirling inside me must have been written clearly all over my weathered face. I walked straight down the narrow aisle toward the front counter, my eyes locked directly on her small frame. She picked up a damp, dirty rag and turned around to wipe down a nearby empty table. That was when she finally looked up and saw me standing there. The last remaining drops of color instantly drained from her already pale face. She froze completely solid, her tired eyes widening in sheer absolute terror. Her raw fingers went completely limp, and a thick glass water pitcher slipped right from her grasp. It hit the floor with a loud, violent crash, shattering into 100 sharp pieces, sending freezing ice and water splashing across our shoes. The loud noise made half the diner jump in their seats, but I did not even flinch. I took another step forward, stopping just inches away from her trembling body. Chloe immediately burst into tears. She brought her shaking hands up to cover her mouth, her narrow shoulders heaving with sudden, violent, uncontrollable sobs. She looked exactly like a trapped animal, absolutely terrified of what I was going to do. I reached out and gently grabbed her thin arms to steady her. "Chloe, what in the name of God is going on here?" I demanded, my voice kept low but vibrating with a commanding intensity. "Where is Cameron? Why are you doing this?" She shook her head frantically, unable to catch her breath, thick tears streaming down her hollow cheeks. The gruff cook yelled at her harshly from the kitchen window, demanding she clean up the broken glass immediately. The conflict instantly shifted from a terrible suspicion to a full-blown active crisis. She looked around frantically at the staring customers and her angry boss, absolutely paralyzed by fear. "I cannot talk right now, Jerome," she whispered, her voice cracking with pure, unadulterated desperation. "Please, they will fire me. I need this job. I need the money to survive." I stared deeply into her terrified, bloodshot eyes, seeing the utter desperation of a mother fighting a losing battle. I let go of her arms, taking a deep, steadying breath to calm the raging storm inside me. "I will go sit back in my booth," I said firmly, my voice leaving absolutely no room for argument. "You are going to finish your shift, and when you are done, I am driving you home. You are going to tell me exactly what my son has done." I turned around and walked away, my blood running ice cold, with the absolute certainty that the family I sacrificed everything for was already burning to the ground. I walked her out of that rundown diner and straight into the freezing winter downpour. The heavy rain was coming down in thick, blinding sheets that violently washed over the cracked pavement of the parking lot and soaked completely through my work boots. I kept my heavy canvas jacket wrapped tight around her fragile, trembling shoulders and gently guided her small frame toward my old pickup truck. She moved with agonizing slowness because her body was heavy with the burden of her third trimester and the crushing exhaustion of surviving yet another double shift on her feet. I carefully helped her up into the passenger seat and closed the heavy metal door against the raging storm before walking around the front of the hood to the driver's side. When I climbed in and cranked the ignition, the truck engine roared to life and the heater immediately kicked on to blow a steady stream of warm, dry air into the cramped, damp cabin. Chloe sat with her knees pulled tightly together while her raw, blistered hands clutched the wet fabric of her faded pink uniform dress. She stared straight ahead at the rhythmic sweep of the windshield wipers, looking exactly like a terrified prisoner waiting in the dark for a harsh sentence to be handed down. I put the heavy truck in gear and slowly pulled out onto the dark, rain-slicked highway. I made a conscious effort to keep my voice as calm and steady as I possibly could to desperately hide the raging storm of anger and confusion that was tearing through my chest. I asked her in a gentle tone to give me the address to their new house so I could take her safely home to her husband. I fully expected her to name one of those sprawling, pristine subdivisions out in the wealthy northern suburbs. I was anticipating an address in the kind of place with grand brick entrance signs and private security gates and perfectly paved driveways lined with quiet trees. That was the secure dream my son had confidently sold me on my back patio. That was the safe, prosperous life I had willingly drained my entire firefighting pension to secure for my growing family. Instead, her voice trembled as she gave me a street name that made the blood in my veins run absolutely cold. It was an avenue located deep in the forgotten industrial underbelly of the next county over. It was a notorious neighborhood widely known for its boarded-up storefronts and rising violent crime rates and completely crumbling public infrastructure. It was the absolute last place on earth a highly successful physical therapist should be hiding his vulnerable pregnant wife. I followed her quiet, hesitant directions in stunned silence. We drove for nearly 45 minutes through the dark, relentless storm. With every single mile that passed beneath our tires, the surrounding environment grew visibly darker and colder and significantly more desolate. We quickly left the well-lit commercial districts far behind us in the rearview mirror. The smooth asphalt of the main highway turned into deeply potholed, neglected back roads that violently shook the worn suspension of my old truck. We drove slowly past massive abandoned manufacturing warehouses with shattered glass windows and overgrown empty lots filled with trash and rusted chain-link fences topped with coils of dangerous razor wire. The streetlights out in this forgotten sector were either completely broken or flickering violently in the heavy winter wind. Finally, she pointed a shaking pale finger toward a massive, decaying apartment complex looming menacingly in the darkness. The imposing brick facade of the enormous building was stained a deep, sickly black, with decades of severe neglect and deep water damage. The sprawling parking lot was a minefield of muddy potholes and shattered glass and abandoned rusted vehicles sitting uselessly on concrete cinder blocks. I slowly pulled my truck into a dark visitor spot and shifted the gear into park and turned off the headlights. I turned to look across the cabin at Chloe while silently praying with every fiber of my being that this was just a brief, temporary stop. But she unbuckled her seatbelt and hung her blonde head extremely low in a posture of absolute shame before whispering softly that we were finally home. The word tasted like bitter poison on my tongue. I stepped out into the freezing rain and walked her toward the dark entrance of Building 4. The thick safety glass in the main security door had been violently smashed out long ago. We walked into a narrow, suffocating hallway, illuminated by a single buzzing fluorescent bulb that cast a sickly, jaundiced yellow light. The stagnant air inside the building was thick and heavy and reeked strongly of stale cigarette smoke and pervasive mildew. I stayed closely by her side as we slowly climbed 3 flights of steep, uneven concrete stairs. When we reached the dim third-floor landing, she pulled a scratched brass key from her pocket and unlocked a flimsy, hollow wooden door, completely covered in peeling brown paint. She pushed the creaking door open and reached blindly for a wall switch. The overhead fixture flickered weakly to life, and I finally stepped inside my unborn grandchild's supposedly luxurious nursery. The harsh reality of the room hit me significantly harder than a direct physical punch to the jaw. It was a tiny, cramped, depressing one-bedroom box. There was no premium furniture. There were no fresh coats of expensive paint. The cheap carpet beneath my heavy boots was severely stained and threadbare. In the corner of the small, drafty living room sat a cheap, sagging futon covered by a single fleece blanket. A tiny, outdated television rested precariously on top of a plastic milk crate. But the absolute worst part was the horrifying detail that made my chest tighten with protective panic. I saw dark patches of toxic black mold visibly blooming high up in the corners of the ceiling, right over the empty space meant for a crib. The apartment was freezing cold because a harsh draft blew straight through the rattling windows. This was not a secure home. This was a dark, forgotten place where people went when they had nowhere else to turn. Chloe stood frozen in the center of that miserable freezing room, while her thin arms wrapped tightly around her swollen belly in a desperate attempt to protect her baby from the bitter cold. She absolutely refused to look up at me. The profound sense of personal shame radiating off her fragile body was so incredibly intense it filled the entire apartment and practically suffocated all the breathable air in the tiny space. I slowly took off my wet canvas winter jacket and deliberately draped it over the back of a cheap, mismatched plastic dining chair. I walked over to the terribly sagging futon and sat down heavily on the very edge of the worn cushion before gently patting the empty space right beside me. I kept my voice incredibly soft, utilizing the exact same calm, steady tone I used to employ when pulling terrified, trapped victims out of the smoking wreckage of a collapsed building. I told her to come sit down with me. I told her with absolute sincerity that she did not have to carry this terrible, crushing burden by herself for one more second. She took 2 highly unsteady steps toward the low futon before her exhausted knees completely buckled beneath her weight. She collapsed heavily onto the cushion beside me and immediately buried her incredibly pale, exhausted face deep into her rough, red, overworked hands. The invisible dam finally broke wide open. Years of carefully constructed lies and countless months of silent, agonizing suffering, and the sheer physical exhaustion of her brutal daily life, all came pouring out in a violent, uncontrollable wave of heavy, heartbreaking sobs. Her narrow, bony shoulders shook so incredibly hard, I genuinely feared she might physically break apart right there in front of my eyes. I reached out and wrapped my strong arm around her shaking frame, letting her cry freely and letting her finally release the massive, dark, tidal wave of fear she had been silently drowning in for a very long time. When her ragged breathing finally started to steady, leaving her with only small, quiet, involuntary hiccups, I carefully asked the painful question that had been burning a hole directly through my mind since I saw her carrying those heavy, greasy plates at the diner. I asked her specifically about the luxury house located in the safe, premium gated community. I asked her in a gentle whisper about the sprawling, immaculate 4-bedroom estate my son had supposedly purchased for his beautiful growing family. Chloe slowly wiped her severely bloodshot eyes with the back of her damp wrist and shook her head with a profound, agonizing slowness. She looked at me with an expression of pure, unadulterated defeat and told me the devastating truth. There was never any house. There was never a prestigious gated community. There was never a beautifully manicured lawn, or a safe, quiet neighborhood, or a newly painted nursery. Cameron had brought her directly to this decaying, dangerous apartment complex 6 entire months ago, right after they joyfully discovered she was pregnant. He told her it was just a very brief temporary living situation and a minor necessary sacrifice they had to make for a few short months, while he aggressively poured every single available dollar into launching his premium downtown physical therapy clinic. He solemnly promised her that once the medical business inevitably took off, they would immediately pack their bags and move straight into their perfect dream home. But the business never took off. According to the grim stories Cameron continuously told her, the downtown clinic was an absolute catastrophic financial disaster from the very first operational day. He claimed he was suddenly hit with massive unexpected commercial zoning fees and incredibly severe delays in expensive medical equipment, delivery, and greedy corrupt construction, contractors who robbed his business blind. He came back to this awful apartment night after night, flawlessly playing the highly convincing role of the stressed, overwhelmed, desperate young entrepreneur. He looked his pregnant wife in the eye and told her he was rapidly drowning in operational debt and could not even afford to keep the essential electricity running at his commercial leasing space. That was the precise moment he started coming aggressively after her personal money. Chloe confessed, with her voice dropping to a terrified, barely audible whisper, that Cameron literally begged her on his knees to help him keep his professional dream alive. She is a genuinely good, deeply trusting woman who loved her ambitious husband completely and unconditionally. She wholeheartedly believed every single desperate word that confidently came out of his lying mouth. She completely and utterly emptied her own highly modest savings account by willingly handing over the few $1,000s she had painfully managed to save from her grueling waitressing jobs over the past decade. When that money inevitably vanished into the void, he sternly told her they were going to lose absolutely everything if they did not cut their daily living expenses down to the absolute bare bone. She revealed the truly horrifying reality about her daily routine. Cameron claimed he was working 90-hour weeks at the failing clinic, desperately trying to save the business, while purposefully leaving her entirely alone in this mold-infested freezing box. Because he supposedly was not bringing home a single dime of actual profit, The entire crushing burden of their basic survival fell squarely onto her fragile shoulders. She was working grueling, back-breaking double shifts at that rundown roadside diner, spending 14 uninterrupted hours a day on her badly swollen feet, carrying incredibly heavy trays of dirty dishes, just to afford the basic minimal necessities of human life. Every crumpled, grease-stained dollar bill she earned from tips went straight toward paying the exorbitant rent for this miserable apartment and keeping the cheap electricity faintly running and slowly, agonizingly buying individual generic boxes of diapers and baby formula. She was literally working herself into an early grave to prepare for the arrival of my innocent grandchild, while her husband fed her a steady, toxic diet of empty promises and terrifying, relentless financial panic. She apologized through her tears for being such a total failure of a mother before her baby was even born. I sat perfectly rigidly still on that worn-out, sagging futon while silently listening to the heavy, freezing rain battering violently against the thin, cracked glass of the apartment window. My mind was racing at a terrifying speed while mathematically calculating the absolutely devastating reality of the situation unfolding before my eyes. Cameron had repeatedly told her the clinic was failing miserably. He had entirely drained her tiny, hard-earned personal savings account. He was maliciously forcing her to pay the monthly rent and diligently buy essential baby supplies using nothing but crumpled diner tips. But there was a massive, glaring, completely catastrophic hole in his entire narrative. $150,000. That was the exact specific amount of cash I had willingly wired directly into his personal bank account just a few short months prior. I had absolutely gutted my secure, lifelong firefighting pension and entirely emptied my complete life savings to proudly provide the initial capital for his business and the massive down payment for their beautiful house. If Cameron never bought a single piece of residential real estate, and if the physical therapy clinic was supposedly so completely broke from day one that he had to steal his pregnant wife's waitressing money just to physically survive the winter, I had to know where in the name of God my money was hiding. I turned my head and looked deeply at Chloe. I gently, carefully asked her if Cameron had ever mentioned the extraordinarily large financial gift I had eagerly given them to secure their future. Her tear-filled, exhausted eyes went incredibly wide with genuine, absolute, unfiltered confusion. She had absolutely no earthly idea what I was talking about. She had never seen a single solitary penny of my hard-earned life savings. The deep, agonizing sting of emotional betrayal violently cut me straight to the bone. My own flesh and blood, and the cherished son I had raised, loved, and fiercely protected, had looked me dead in the eye and taken my entire financial nest egg before vanishing the money into thin air. He was hiding a massive secret fortune somewhere out there in the city, while deliberately forcing his heavily pregnant wife to serve greasy food to strangers in the middle of a freezing night just to keep a toxic, moldy roof over her head. The crushing, suffocating sadness inside my chest evaporated in a single defining instant. It was entirely, completely replaced by a towering, burning, profoundly righteous fury. The veteran firefighter inside my soul woke up instantly and clearly recognized that this destruction was no tragic accident. This was deliberate, calculated, malicious arson that was designed to burn our family to the ground. I placed my large, calloused right hand firmly over Chloe's shaking, ice-cold fingers. I looked her directly in the eyes and made a solemn, absolutely unbreakable vow. I promised her that I would fiercely protect her, and I would ruthlessly protect my unborn grandchild, and I was going to hunt down the absolute truth no matter what extreme measures it took to violently drag it out of the shadows. I barely closed my eyes for a single second that entire night. The horrifying image of the toxic black mold creeping across the ceiling of that freezing apartment completely burned itself into my memory. I lay rigidly awake on my comfortable mattress and stared endlessly at the shadows dancing across my bedroom ceiling. I listened to the quiet, steady hum of my secure, heavily insulated house. The stark contrast between my safe, warm environment and the dangerous, freezing box where my pregnant daughter-in-law was currently shivering made me violently, physically sick. I am a man who spent 35 grueling years implicitly trusting my firefighting crew, trusting my safety equipment, and above all else, entirely trusting my own blood. My cherished son had maliciously taken that sacred trust and weaponized it against the innocent people he was morally obligated to protect. When the morning sun finally broke through the gray winter clouds and cast a pale, cold light across my bedroom floor, the heavy, agonizing sadness inside my chest had entirely hardened into a cold, unbreakable, metallic resolve. A veteran firefighter fundamentally knows that when a structural foundation is severely compromised, you absolutely do not stand around outside weeping about the thick smoke. You strap on your heavy gear, you grab your steel breaching tools, and you aggressively break through the drywall to locate the exact violent source of the raging fire. I desperately needed to find the specific source of Cameron's endless toxic lies. I needed to drive downtown and aggressively inspect this supposedly booming premium physical therapy clinic with my own 2 eyes. I quickly brewed a pot of incredibly strong black coffee and drank 2 scalding cups while standing rigidly at my kitchen counter. I grabbed my heavy winter jacket and the worn metal keys to my trusty Ford pickup. Before walking out the front door, I methodically dug through the bottom drawer of my wooden desk and retrieved the crisp, neatly printed business proposal Cameron had so confidently handed me on my back patio all those months ago. It possessed a highly specific commercial address, proudly stamped right on the glossy front page. The address was supposedly located directly in the bustling, lucrative heart of the downtown commercial district. It was an exclusive urban area widely known for housing high-end medical professional offices, expensive luxury boutiques, and an incredibly wealthy, demanding clientele. It was mathematically the absolute perfect premium location for a thriving, highly profitable rehabilitation center. I climbed up into the cold cab of my truck, turned the ignition, and aggressively merged onto the busy morning interstate. The dense commuter traffic was incredibly heavy today, crawling bumper to bumper, as the massive city slowly woke up and countless people rushed toward their warm offices. My large calloused hands gripped the worn leather steering wheel so incredibly tightly that my knuckles turned practically transparent. I unfortunately had far too much quiet time to think while I sat trapped in that endless mechanical gridlock. I systematically and painfully, mentally, replayed every single pathetic excuse Cameron had confidently fed me over the last 6 agonizing months. I clearly remembered the frantic, urgent phone calls complaining bitterly about massive, unexpected commercial zoning fees. I recalled the bitter, angry rants about greedy, corrupt construction contractors allegedly ripping his new business completely blind. I remembered the terrifying, desperate lies he fed Chloe, claiming he absolutely could not even afford to keep the essential electricity running at his commercial leasing space. He had brilliantly painted an incredibly convincing, terrifying picture of a hardworking young entrepreneur rapidly drowning in unavoidable operational debt. But absolutely none of his fabricated stories aligned with the mathematical reality of that initial $150,000 wire transfer. A competent business owner simply does not instantly burn through a massive cash infusion of that incredible size in a mere matter of weeks on simple zoning permits and slightly delayed medical equipment. not without possessing a single tangible physical asset to actually show for the massive expenditure. I slowly drove through the outer concrete rings of the city, constantly watching the changing landscape rapidly transition from quiet, comfortable residential neighborhoods to towering, imposing glass and steel corporate office buildings. I carefully navigated the busy, congested downtown streets while repeatedly double-checking the specific printed address on the glossy proposal against the large green street signs hanging directly overhead. I finally turned the heavy steering wheel and pulled onto the specific wide avenue Cameron had listed on his official paperwork. My heart was pounding a heavy, aggressive rhythm against my ribs. I fully expected to pull my rusty truck up to a sleek, modern, professional medical building featuring beautifully manicured landscaping, bright, welcoming glass doors, and a completely packed parking lot filled with the expensive cars of high-paying athletic clients. I fully expected to see a large, elegant professional sign with my son's given name proudly and brightly displayed right next to the prestigious word clinic. I was mentally and physically totally prepared to march straight through those beautiful glass doors, march directly up to a fancy reception desk, and aggressively demand immediate truthful answers directly from the cowardly man who had ruthlessly stolen my entire life savings and completely abandoned his heavily pregnant wife in a dangerous, decaying, toxic slum. But as I continued driving slowly down the wide avenue, the large metallic numbers on the commercial buildings started to rapidly drop, and the sleek, pristine glass towers abruptly gave way to significantly older, severely neglected brick structures. I slowly crossed over a set of heavily rusted industrial railroad tracks, and the digital navigation system mounted on my truck dashboard calmly announced that I had successfully arrived at my final destination. I pulled my heavy truck over to the cracked concrete curb, shifted the heavy gear into park, and completely killed the rumbling engine. I sat perfectly still and stared out the dirty windshield in absolute, completely bewildered silence. There was absolutely no sleek, modern medical building. There was no beautifully manicured green landscaping, and there were certainly no bright, welcoming glass doors. The exact specific address Cameron had so proudly given me actually belonged to a massive, completely abandoned, decaying concrete strip mall that looked exactly like it had been rotting away under the harsh elements for the better part of a decade. The enormous, sprawling parking lot was a barren, depressing wasteland of violently cracked, broken asphalt that was actively pushing up thick, dead brown weeds through the deep, jagged crevices. Faded, badly peeling yellow lines faintly marked hundreds of empty parking spaces that clearly had not seen a single paying customer in multiple years. I slowly stepped out of the warm truck cab and felt the bitter cold winter wind immediately whip aggressively across the totally empty lot. I walked with a heavy, deliberate stride directly toward the main decaying structure. Every single individual storefront in the incredibly long concrete row was heavily boarded up with thick, dark, weathered plywood. The few large commercial glass windows that were not actively boarded up were completely entirely covered in thick layers of opaque brown grime and aggressive, brightly colored gang graffiti. A massively thick, rusted metal chain aggressively secured the main central entrance gate, and it was locked incredibly tight with a heavy-duty industrial brass padlock. The only visible sign of physical life in the entire desolate area was a scrawny, stray cat that frantically darted out from behind a severely rusted, overflowing metal dumpster. I methodically walked the entire lengthy perimeter of the decaying concrete building, while my heavy leather work boots crunched loudly and aggressively on shattered broken glass and loose, dirty gravel. I carefully checked the exact specific suite number prominently listed on Cameron's fake, glossy business proposal. It perfectly corresponded to a dark, completely hollowed-out, destroyed unit located right in the exact dead center of the ruined complex. The heavy roof directly above that specific unit had completely violently collapsed inward, severely exposing the rotting black wooden support beams directly to the freezing open winter sky. There was absolutely zero physical or logical possibility that anyone had ever conducted any form of legitimate medical business inside this condemned ruin. There was no expensive, shiny rehabilitation equipment. There was absolutely no running electricity. There was not even a fully intact solid concrete floor to safely stand on. The supposed highly premium physical therapy clinic, the terrifying bottomless black hole that had maliciously swallowed my entire lifelong retirement savings and rapidly drained Chloe's incredibly modest hard-earned waitressing money, was absolutely nothing but a complete undeniable phantom. As I stood completely frozen there furiously staring at the collapsed rotting roof, a highly faded, severely weather-beaten plastic commercial sign violently flapping and hanging precariously from a bent rusted metal pole near the street suddenly caught my sharp attention. It boldly advertised commercial leasing opportunities and clearly provided a local contact phone number for a regional property management company. I immediately pulled my cell phone directly from my jacket pocket and aggressively dialed the listed number. My heart was continuously beating with the incredibly slow, heavy, profoundly furious rhythm. A woman possessing a highly bored, deeply nasally, unenthusiastic voice finally answered the ringing phone after 5 agonizingly long rings. I maintained my composure, politely, introduced myself, and clearly stated that I was casually inquiring about the specific commercial property located directly at that exact address. I asked her directly and plainly if a young man named Cameron or any form of premium physical therapy business had recently signed a commercial lease or rented any physical space in that specific building complex within the last 12 entire months. The bored woman on the other end of the line actually let out a harsh, incredibly cynical, loud laugh. She bluntly and lazily informed me that the entire massive property had been officially permanently condemned by the city government over 3 entire years ago due to severe critical structural instability and massive dangerous asbestos contamination. She stated with absolute unwavering certainty that the management company had not officially leased a single solitary square foot of that highly dangerous, toxic property to absolutely anyone in nearly half a decade. They were simply waiting for the final municipal demolition permits to completely and violently level the entire massive hazard straight to the dirt ground. She explicitly and clearly confirmed that absolutely no one named Cameron had ever submitted a leasing application, signed a legal commercial lease, or paid a single solitary dime for that condemned location. I thanked the woman politely, while keeping my voice incredibly dangerously quiet, and slowly hung up the cellular phone. The massive physical reality of the terrifying situation violently crashed down onto my heavy shoulders, with the absolutely devastating, crushing force of a collapsing, burning brick wall. Cameron had completely maliciously fabricated the entire massive business venture out of thin air. He had meticulously and calculatingly printed a completely fake, glossy proposal, confidently sat on my peaceful back patio, and looked his own father dead in the eye, while aggressively selling me a total ghost story. He had maliciously completely drained my entire lifelong firefighting pension to supposedly heavily fund a medical business that literally completely did not exist on this earth. The towering dark mountain of his toxic lies was rapidly growing infinitely darker and exponentially more incredibly dangerous by the very passing second. Later that exact same cold afternoon, I slowly drove my heavy truck directly back to that massive, decaying apartment complex where Chloe was currently miserably trapped. I had deliberately stopped at a local grocery store and purchased 4 incredibly heavy bags packed full of fresh, highly nutritious, expensive food completely determined to firmly ensure my pregnant daughter-in-law had a proper hot meal before starting her next grueling, punishing double shift at that rundown diner. As I carefully walked up to the dark, shattered glass main entrance of her specific building, I immediately noticed the severely rusted metal bank of communal mailboxes violently mounted on the severely cracked brick wall. The incredibly flimsy metal security door to Chloe's specific assigned unit box was completely permanently broken and was currently hanging completely wide open, supported only by a single severely bent rusty hinge. A small, messy stack of white envelopes was precariously haphazardly jammed deeply inside the narrow metal slot, practically spilling completely out onto the dirty, stained concrete floor. I quickly reached out my large hand to carefully push the vulnerable mail safely back inside the metal box. But the bright, aggressive red, highly urgent warning lettering printed directly on the very top envelope immediately violently caught my sharp, observant attention. It was officially legally addressed directly to Cameron, but it absolutely was not a standard past-due apartment utility bill or a desperate, angry collection notice for a failing medical clinic. It was an official automated traffic toll camera violation, legally sent directly from the State Highway Transit Authority. I slowly, carefully pulled the thick, heavy envelope completely free from the rusty box and stared intensely directly at the clear, transparent plastic window on the front. Directly below, Cameron's printed given name was a legally registered corporate business entity, a highly specific, mysterious LLC that I had absolutely never heard of before in my entire life. But what absolutely instantly stopped the warm blood completely cold in my veins was the highly detailed, specific vehicle description, boldly and clearly printed right on the front of the highly visible legal citation. It was a massive, expensive citation for a brand new, incredibly expensive current-year luxury Maserati aggressively driving recklessly through an expensive premium express toll lane located directly downtown. The absolutely staggering financial implications violently hit me exactly like a massive physical blow directly to the center of my chest. Cameron absolutely was not frantically drowning in terrible, suffocating operational debt. He absolutely was not desperately struggling to physically survive a tragically failed medical business venture, while his vulnerable, heavily pregnant wife literally starved inside a freezing, toxic, mold-infested slum. The massive $150,000 I had willingly blindly sacrificed my extremely secure lifelong retirement to lovingly give him had absolutely not tragically disappeared into an unavoidable commercial black hole. It had been highly systematically, deliberately funneled directly into a highly secret corporate LLC to maliciously fund an outrageously lavish, incredibly expensive hidden luxury lifestyle. My cherished son was absolutely not a tragic, stressed-out, failed medical entrepreneur. He was an incredibly wealthy, manipulative phantom, aggressively driving a massive, high-performance, expensive Italian sports car, while maliciously pretending to be completely, entirely penniless. The active conflict instantly, aggressively escalated from a deeply devastating, tragic case of simple business failure to a massive, incredibly deliberate, calculated financial betrayal, and I was absolutely violently determined to rip his entire elaborate hidden curtain completely down to the ground. I sat in the cab of my truck with that toll violation burning a hole in my hand. A Maserati. My son was driving a high-performance Italian sports car, while his pregnant wife was coughing in a moldy apartment. The anger inside me was a physical weight pressing down on my chest, but I knew that blind rage was the enemy of strategy. In my 35 years fighting fires, I learned that when you face a chemical blaze, you do not just throw water on it and pray. You need the right extinguishing agent. You need specific tools. I was an old man who barely knew how to operate a smartphone beyond making calls and sending simple text messages. I knew how to breach a steel door with an axe, but I had absolutely no idea how to breach a corporate LLC or trace a hidden digital money trail. I needed backup. I needed someone sharp, ruthless, and entirely immune to my son's smooth-talking charm. There was only one person who fit that description perfectly: Sarah. Chloe is the sweet, trusting soul of her family. But her older sister, Sarah, is a completely different breed of woman. Sarah is a 32-year-old paralegal working for a tough corporate law firm right in the heart of Atlanta. She is a no-nonsense, fiercely protective white woman who has always possessed an incredibly sharp eye for lies. From the very first day Cameron brought Chloe home to meet the family, Sarah kept her distance. While everyone else was completely charmed by his expensive suits and grand promises about the future, she would just cross her arms and watch him with a cold, calculating gaze. She told me once at their wedding reception that my son talked a little too fast and smiled a little too easily. I had dismissed her warnings back then as simple sisterly overprotectiveness. Now I realized she was the only person who had actually seen the smoke before the fire started. I pulled my truck out of the decaying apartment complex and drove to a quiet local diner halfway between the city and my suburb. I parked in the back and dialed Sarah's number. She answered on the second ring with her usual crisp, professional tone. I did not waste a single second with small talk. I told her I needed to see her immediately, and that it was a matter of life and death regarding her sister and the unborn baby. The line went dead quiet for a moment before she demanded to know exactly where I was. She arrived less than 40 minutes later, sliding into the vinyl booth across from me. She was wearing a sharp gray business suit, her blonde hair pulled back tightly, and her eyes scanning my face with intense alarm. I did not try to soften the blow. I reached into my jacket pocket and slowly slid the heavy toll violation envelope across the scratched table. I watched her read the red lettering, the corporate LLC name, and the specific vehicle description: a Maserati. She looked up at me with profound confusion. I took a deep breath and laid out every single horrifying detail I had uncovered over the last 48 hours. I told her about finding Chloe serving double shifts at that freezing roadside diner. I described the toxic black mold growing aggressively on the ceiling of their miserable apartment. I told her the physical therapy clinic downtown was a complete phantom, an abandoned, condemned building that had not seen a single tenant in years. And finally, I confessed the most shameful truth of all. I told her about the $150,000 I had willingly wired to my son, which had now completely vanished into thin air. Sarah sat perfectly still, her eyes wide and her jaw locked so tightly, the muscles in her face twitched. She is a woman who deals with corporate fraud and messy divorces for a living, but hearing that her own pregnant sister was being systematically tortured and starved by the man she married shattered her professional composure. Her pale face flushed with an intense, furious red. She slammed her hand down on the diner table so hard the coffee cups rattled violently. She cursed my son's name with a venom that would have normally offended me, but today it sounded like absolute music to my ears. I told her I needed her specific legal expertise. I needed her to help me follow the digital money trail without Cameron ever realizing we were actively hunting him. Sarah did not hesitate for a fraction of a second. She reached across the table and grabbed my calloused hands, looking me dead in the eye. She promised me we were going to tear his entire fake life down to the bare studs. Before we could formulate a solid plan of attack, Sarah demanded to see the apartment with her own two eyes. We drove separately back to that forgotten industrial district. The afternoon sun offered absolutely no warmth to the decaying brick facade of the massive complex. When we climbed the uneven concrete stairs, and I unlocked the flimsy wooden door with the spare key Chloe had reluctantly given me, Sarah actually gasped out loud. The stale, heavy stench of mildew and rotting wood hit us immediately. Sarah walked slowly into the center of the freezing, cramped living room. She touched the cheap, sagging futon. She stared in absolute horror at the dark, toxic black mold blooming aggressively directly above the space where her innocent nephew was supposed to sleep. The professional, tough paralegal completely vanished, replacing her with a heartbroken older sister. Sarah broke down weeping silently as she walked into the tiny, drafty kitchen and opened the small refrigerator. It contained nothing but a half-empty carton of generic milk, a loaf of cheap white bread, and 2 bruised apples. This was the luxurious life my son had promised her sister. This was the reality he was forcing his pregnant wife to endure while he aggressively drove an Italian sports car through the expensive downtown toll lanes. The sheer absolute cruelty of it was physically nauseating. Sarah wiped her eyes aggressively with the back of her hand, and when she turned around to face me, the sadness was entirely gone. It was replaced by a cold, calculating, and utterly terrifying rage. We sat down together on that miserable, sagging futon and formed a definitive, unbreakable alliance. We established our absolute rules of engagement right then and there. The most critical rule was absolute silence. Cameron could not suspect a single thing. He was a master manipulator playing a high-stakes game of deception, and if he sensed even a fraction of our suspicion, he would immediately destroy the evidence, hide the remaining money, and likely disappear completely, leaving Chloe buried under a mountain of his manufactured debt. I had to continue playing the role of the naive, trusting old father, while Sarah had to play the distant, busy sister who rarely checked in. Sarah aggressively laid out her initial strategy. She explained that a man living a massive double life always makes mistakes because arrogance breeds extreme carelessness. He was operating a secret LLC, driving a luxury vehicle, and hiding $150,000 of my stolen retirement money. That meant there were hidden bank accounts, commercial leasing contracts, and a massive paper trail just waiting to be uncovered. But to find those specific documents, Sarah needed a backdoor directly into his digital life. She needed passwords, account numbers, or a device that contained his personal data. I racked my brain trying to remember any small detail Chloe had mentioned during her tearful confession the night before. Then it hit me like a physical blow. Chloe had briefly complained that Cameron had taken her only working laptop to his supposed clinic, claiming he needed it for urgent payroll software. In exchange, he had left an old, cracked Apple iPad sitting in the bottom drawer of the bedroom dresser, claiming the battery was completely dead and the screen was broken. He told her it was useless garbage and expressly forbade her from wasting money trying to get it repaired. I rushed into the cramped bedroom and pulled open the bottom drawer of the cheap dresser. Buried underneath a pile of worn-out maternity shirts, I found the sleek silver tablet. The glass screen was indeed heavily spiderwebbed with deep cracks, but the device itself remained fully intact. I walked back into the living room and handed the cold metal tablet directly to Sarah. Her eyes lit up with a dangerous, brilliant intensity. She turned the device over in her hands, inspecting the charging port. She told me that men like Cameron always underestimate the women they abuse. They think a broken screen equals a broken memory drive. She promised me that if she could get this device to power on and connect to a wireless network, she could potentially bypass the security lock, using Chloe's shared family account information. We had just found our ultimate weapon, and the war was officially underway. She carefully slipped the damaged tablet into her leather briefcase, as if she were handling a highly volatile explosive. We spent the next hour thoroughly cleaning the small apartment and quietly leaving a large envelope of cash hidden in Chloe's coat pocket so she could buy proper groceries without arousing Cameron's suspicion. We locked the peeling door behind us, completely unified in our silent mission to absolutely destroy the monster who had stolen our family. Later that exact same evening, I sat waiting anxiously at my kitchen table, staring intensely at my phone. The silence in my house was absolutely deafening. Sarah had taken the cracked tablet back to her secure apartment, promising to call me the very second she managed to coax it back to life. Every passing minute felt like a grueling hour. I nervously paced the hardwood floor, drinking cup after cup of bitter black coffee. Finally, just past midnight, my phone vibrated violently across the wooden table. I snatched it up immediately. Sarah's voice came through the speaker, sounding incredibly breathless and tight, with a mixture of absolute triumph and sheer horror. She had successfully bypassed the broken charging port and powered the old machine on. Because Cameron was deeply arrogant, he had never bothered to log out of his primary cloud storage account before abandoning the device in that freezing slum. The absolute second the tablet connected to Sarah's wireless internet, a massive, relentless flood of delayed digital notifications violently exploded across the cracked screen. Sarah began reading the incoming alerts aloud to me, and every single word opened a terrifying, completely new layer of active conflict. There were aggressive automated text messages from a luxury high-rise condominium management company reminding him about premium parking fees. There were digital receipts for thousands of dollars spent at high-end jewelry boutiques and exclusive downtown steakhouses. But the absolute worst notification, the one that made the blood freeze completely solid in my veins, was an automated calendar alert. It was a brightly colored reminder set for the upcoming weekend. It read simply, "Anniversary weekend getaway to Miami with my love." My son was not just hiding a luxury vehicle and a secret corporate bank account. He was actively maintaining an entirely separate, lavish household with another woman, while his heavily pregnant wife literally starved. The sheer scale of his betrayal was no longer just a simple financial theft. It was a massive, calculated psychological torture. We now possessed the digital key to his entire hidden kingdom. The Phantom Clinic was dead, and the real hunt was about to begin with terrifying consequences. I gripped the phone tightly and told Sarah to download absolutely everything before he realized the old device was online and wiped it remotely. We had finally breached the heavy locked doors of his toxic lies, and the horrifying darkness spilling out was enough to warrant a complete and total destruction of his life. The glowing screen of that severely cracked silver tablet illuminated the dark, painted walls of Sarah's small apartment with a harsh, unforgiving, artificial light. We sat closely, shoulder to shoulder, at her heavy wooden dining table, staring in absolute stunned, breathless silence as the digital floodgates of my son's hidden, terrifying reality violently burst wide open. I am a man who spent his entire adult life bravely running headfirst into roaring chemical fires and dangerously collapsing structures. I have seen the absolute worst physical tragedies this unpredictable, chaotic world has to offer humanity. I have witnessed beautiful family homes completely reduced to smoking black ash, and heartbroken families sobbing uncontrollably on the concrete curb, with absolutely nothing left to their names but the soot-stained clothes on their backs. But staring intently at the high-resolution color photographs rapidly downloading onto that damaged, glowing screen, I felt a completely different kind of terrifying, catastrophic destruction. This was not a random, unavoidable accident of wild nature. This was highly calculated, malicious arson deliberately committed by the very boy I had lovingly raised with my own two hands. The very first photograph that aggressively popped up on the synced cloud storage drive was a wide-angle professional-style shot of a breathtaking high-rise luxury condominium. It was the exact kind of premium expensive real estate located directly in the wealthy beating corporate heart of the downtown financial district. The massive, spotless floor-to-ceiling glass windows offered an incredible sweeping panoramic view of the glowing evening city skyline. The incredibly spacious open-concept living room was flawlessly decorated with pristine white leather furniture, highly polished dark hardwood floors, and expensive modern abstract art hanging perfectly on the freshly painted walls. It was a picture of absolute flawless, overwhelming prosperity. It was the exact, secure, comfortable environment my son had confidently and smoothly promised he was building for his pregnant wife and my innocent, unborn grandchild. But sweet, hard-working Chloe was absolutely nowhere to be found in those glossy photographs. She was currently miles away, shivering in a toxic mold-infested slum, desperately rubbing her swollen, aching feet after serving cheap, greasy food to truckers in a roadside diner. Instead, the woman smiling radiantly and confidently in those countless digital pictures was a complete, absolute stranger. She was a young, incredibly fit woman who looked exactly like one of those shallow, obsessed internet fitness influencers. She had long, perfectly styled, flowing dark hair, highly expensive manicured nails, and she was wearing premium designer workout clothes that likely cost significantly more than Chloe's entire monthly apartment rent. In picture after picture, she was confidently posing in front of massive hallway mirrors, flexing her toned muscles and boldly showing off her lavish, completely carefree lifestyle. And right there, standing proudly right beside her with a smug, incredibly arrogant grin plastered across his face was my own son. Cameron was entirely unrecognizable from the stressed, struggling, desperate young entrepreneur he had flawlessly pretended to be while sitting on my quiet back patio. He was absolutely not wearing modest medical scrubs or the dusty, worn boots of a hard-working, dedicated man trying to build a new physical therapy clinic from the ground up. He was dressed flawlessly in an incredibly expensive, custom-tailored designer suit that hugged his shoulders perfectly. A massive, heavy gold luxury watch gleamed brightly, reflecting the condo lights on his left wrist. In one particular short video clip, he was casually holding a crystal flute of expensive, bubbly champagne, laughing loudly at some unheard joke and leaning in to kiss the young fitness model directly and passionately on the lips. The sheer scale of his disgusting, elaborate double life was absolutely nauseating to visually witness. Sarah clicked aggressively and silently through a separate massive folder of images completely dedicated to his luxury vehicles. There were dozens of high-definition pictures of that exact same current year, expensive Italian Maserati we had previously seen listed on the intercepted toll violation notice. There were detailed photos of Cameron proudly gripping the hand-stitched soft leather steering wheel, photos of the sleek aerodynamic sports car safely parked in an exclusive restricted underground VIP garage, and pictures of him accelerating aggressively down the open highway with the young mistress laughing joyfully in the comfortable passenger seat. Every single vivid image was a violent, twisting stab directly into my aching chest. The precise timestamp metadata digitally attached to these hidden files completely destroyed any lingering fraction of a naive hope. These lavish photographs were absolutely not old, forgotten memories from his distant single days before his marriage. They were actively being taken during the exact same agonizing, painful months when he was deliberately and systematically starving his heavily pregnant wife. While Chloe was weeping silently in that freezing dark apartment because she could not afford basic infant baby formula, Cameron was casually swiping expensive heavy credit cards at high-end downtown steakhouses and freely buying premium diamond jewelry for his secret girlfriend. He was maliciously draining every single drop of life and hope out of a good, innocent woman, simply to generously fund an outrageous, extravagant fantasy life with another. The profound, crushing sense of failure I felt as an older father was momentarily totally overwhelming. I had poured every ounce of my love, my strict moral teachings, and my hard-earned financial resources into this boy. I had genuinely and deeply believed I was raising an honorable, responsible man who respected the sacred, unbreakable vows of family. To see him standing there, dripping in stolen, unearned luxury, while ruthlessly abandoning his own flesh and blood, made me physically sick to my empty stomach. But that heavy, suffocating, dark wave of parental grief was rapidly and entirely consumed by a towering, cold, highly mechanical fury. I was no longer looking at my cherished, beloved son. I was looking at a dangerous, ruthless, destructive parasite, and I was going to systematically dismantle his entire hidden operation piece by bloody piece. Sarah did not shed a single emotional tear as she aggressively and expertly navigated through the dense digital folders. Her face was firmly set into a rigid mask of pure, cold, terrifying legal determination. She completely ignored the disgusting romantic photos and expertly bypassed the shallow social media files, diving straight into a highly secure hidden folder labeled simply with the specific name of that mysterious corporate LLC we had discovered earlier that afternoon. She understood perfectly well from her intense paralegal career that catching a cheating spouse in a lie was one thing, but legally tracing stolen hidden assets required hard, undeniable, concrete financial documentation. What she rapidly found hidden deeply inside that specific encrypted digital folder elevated the active conflict from a deeply tragic case of simple marital infidelity to a massive, terrifying level of highly calculated financial fraud. She quickly opened a long series of scanned, complex, legal real estate documents. They were the official, finalized closing papers and the heavily stamped, notarized property deed for that breathtaking downtown luxury condominium. Sarah's sharp, trained eyes quickly scanned the dense, confusing legal jargon and the complex, layered ownership structures. She read the specific critical details aloud to me, and her usually steady voice was shaking slightly, with a potent mixture of professional shock and sheer, unfiltered rage. The premium high-rise condo was not merely being rented month to month by a wealthy landlord. It had been officially permanently purchased in full. But the most horrifying, brilliant detail was the specific name legally and officially listed on the property title. Cameron had absolutely not used his own given name. He had completely registered the massive, expensive property directly under the young mistress's personal name, while acting through the protective shield of the hidden corporate LLC. The specific legal strategy heavily driving that specific move was absolutely diabolical and brilliantly cruel. By legally placing the massive physical asset entirely in his secret girlfriend's name, he had successfully and deliberately ensured that the luxury property existed completely entirely off his own official financial records. If Chloe eventually tragically discovered his sickening constant affairs and bravely filed for a legal divorce, she would mathematically and legally walk away with absolutely nothing. When the tough family court lawyers aggressively searched for his personal assets, they would only find a failed, empty phantom physical therapy clinic and a massive mountain of fake manufactured operational debt. He had meticulously and ruthlessly built a solid, impenetrable legal concrete wall to protect his stolen hidden wealth while completely burying his innocent pregnant wife in the muddy dirt. Then Sarah aggressively clicked open the digital bank wire receipts directly associated with the real estate closing transaction. My aging heart completely stopped beating when the bright, glowing screen displayed a highly familiar scanned official bank document. It was a direct bank transfer confirmation, proudly displaying my exact personal long-term account routing numbers. It was the precise exact sum of $150,000. I sat there in the dark, silent apartment and literally watched the undeniable visual proof of my entire life savings being instantly, violently swallowed into that toxic black hole. The money that I had sacrificed my highly secure retirement for the funds I had proudly and happily handed over to permanently secure a safe, warm home for my vulnerable unborn grandchild had been maliciously funneled directly into the LLC corporate bank account. It had been utilized as the initial massive cash payment to instantly secure a premium sky-high love nest for a shallow fitness influencer. The burning anger I felt was so incredibly intense, it actually made my peripheral vision blur darkly at the edges. I had continuously risked my life pulling terrified people out of burning toxic buildings for 35 grueling, physically demanding years to actively earn that specific secure pension. Every single dollar represented a missed family holiday, a severely burned hand, or an exhausted, sleepless night away from my own beautiful late wife. And my trusted son had casually handed it all over to a total stranger with a fake, reassuring smile. But the terrifying financial horror was not even remotely finished unfolding. Sarah continued scrolling rapidly and intensely through the final property closing statements, and her moving finger suddenly froze, hovering directly over the sensitive digital trackpad. She let out a sharp, incredibly loud gasp of genuine, utter confusion. She pulled the cracked, glowing screen much closer to her pale face and rapidly did the complex mental math. She pointed her shaking finger directly at the final recorded purchase price of the downtown luxury condominium. The beautiful, exclusive, high-rise property had not cost a mere $150,000. The final recorded cash purchase price was well over $350,000, paid entirely, completely in full, with zero traditional mortgage financing attached to the LLC documents. Sarah quickly backed out of the dense real estate folder and aggressively opened a separate file containing the LLC's primary monthly banking statements. She scrolled frantically down to the exact specific month when the property was officially fully purchased. Right there, directly below the recorded incoming wire transfer of my stolen $150,000, was another massive, highly suspicious financial transaction. It was a cleared incoming official wire deposit for an additional $200,000. It had landed heavily in the secret corporate account just 3 short weeks after I had completely emptied my own secure retirement funds. The heavy silence in Sarah's small dining room was absolutely, completely deafening. We both sat entirely frozen, staring at that massive, impossible number glaring brightly on the severely cracked screen. The math simply did not make any logical, mathematical sense whatsoever. We already absolutely knew for a confirmed, undeniable fact that Cameron had absolutely no successful, legitimate medical business. We had physically stood in the desolate, freezing parking lot of the abandoned, condemned strip mall and fully confirmed the premium physical therapy clinic was a complete, total, malicious ghost story. We absolutely knew that he had aggressively and ruthlessly drained Chloe's tiny, hard-earned waitressing savings just to barely pay the miserable, cheap rent at that toxic, moldy apartment complex. He possessed absolutely no other wealthy, generous relatives, no hidden family trust funds, and absolutely no legitimate, high-paying professional clients. My blood ran completely solid, ice cold in my old veins, as a terrifying, incredibly dark, new realization violently crashed down upon my heavy, tired shoulders. If my own son was entirely, completely broke before I gave him my life savings, and if the highly touted medical clinic was a total calculated sham, then he absolutely did not legally earn that additional $200,000 through any form of honest, hard, demanding work. He had clearly and maliciously stolen it from somewhere else or someone else. The sheer terrifying magnitude of his dark financial crimes was expanding at an alarming, completely uncontrollable rate. I stared deeply at the glowing digital numbers, and a sickening, incredibly dark shadow of dread began to creep slowly and painfully up my spine. Where, in the absolute name of God, did that extra massive fortune actually come from? The horrifying revelation of that massive mystery deposit kept me aggressively pacing the hardwood floors of my home until the morning sun finally came up. I watched the pale winter dawn break through the tall Georgia pines, feeling significantly older and infinitely heavier than I had ever felt in my entire 65 years of living. My son was not just a desperate liar and a pathetic cheat. He was a highly calculated, ruthless thief operating on a massive, staggering financial scale. But the burning, agonizing question remained completely unanswered in my tired mind. Where exactly did a supposedly failed physical therapist get his greedy hands on that kind of massive cash? I knew with absolute certainty that I had to secure my own immediate financial survival before I could safely plan my next aggressive move. I needed to know exactly down to the final solitary penny how much money I actually had left in my modest checking and savings accounts. I had to figure out how to stretch my remaining fixed retirement income to quietly support Chloe and buy her highly nutritious groceries without tipping off my son to our secret investigation. I washed my exhausted face, put on a clean-pressed button-down shirt, and drove my heavy truck straight to my local bank branch. This was the exact same quiet neighborhood bank I had loyally used for over 20 solid years. I knew the friendly tellers by their first names, and they knew exactly how I liked my withdrawal slips properly filled out. I walked slowly through the heavy, thick glass doors, desperately seeking a small, familiar shred of stability in a dark world that was rapidly spinning completely out of control. I asked the young teller at the front counter if I could sit down and speak directly with Mr. Henderson, the primary branch manager. Mr. Henderson was a genuinely good, honest man about my exact age who had personally helped me carefully set up my late wife's passing estate several years ago. He welcomed me warmly into his bright glass-walled office with a strong, firm handshake and kindly offered me a fresh cup of hot black coffee. We politely exchanged casual pleasantries about the changing, bitter winter weather and my supposedly quiet, peaceful retirement before I finally got down to the pressing, urgent business at hand. I asked him to carefully pull up a comprehensive, detailed summary of my personal accounts, explaining convincingly that I was simply trying to strictly budget my upcoming holiday expenses for my growing family. Mr. Henderson cheerfully tapped away on his black computer keyboard, adjusting his reading glasses as the digital numbers rapidly populated on his glowing monitor. He read off my incredibly meager checking balance and my severely depleted savings account. The numbers were grim and highly depressing, exactly as I expected, after willingly giving Cameron the absolute bulk of my life savings. I nodded slowly and thoughtfully, mentally calculating exactly how many weeks of fresh food and baby supplies that small amount would actually buy for a heavily pregnant woman. Then Mr. Henderson leaned comfortably back in his thick leather executive chair and smiled warmly across the desk at me. He casually mentioned in a highly conversational tone that it was incredibly smart and proactive of me to leverage the existing equity in my property during these turbulent, unpredictable financial times. He said he was personally very glad to see the massive funds had been successfully dispersed without any banking delays, and asked politely if I was actively planning to use the cash to do some major exciting renovations on the house before the new baby arrived. The warm air in the small glass office instantly became incredibly thick and violently suffocating. My lungs simply stopped working entirely. I stared blankly at the kind man across the heavy wooden desk, completely and entirely unable to comprehend the terrifying words that had just casually rolled off his tongue. I forced my dry mouth to open, but my vocal cords felt exactly like they were tightly wrapped in heavy rusted chains. I asked him in a low, strained, terrified whisper to please repeat exactly what he had just said to me. Mr. Henderson looked slightly confused and mildly concerned by my intense physical reaction. He turned his flat computer monitor slightly toward me and pointed a steady finger at a separate financial file securely linked directly to my primary banking profile. He stated clearly and plainly that he was referring to the recent home equity line of credit, the massive secondary mortgage I had recently taken out against my fully paid-off home. He calmly read the exact specific date of the financial transaction, which was just a few short weeks after I had originally emptied my retirement accounts for Cameron. And then he read the final approved loan amount. It was exactly $200,000. The sheer physical impact of hearing that specific massive number felt exactly like taking a brutal, heavy swing from a solid steel sledgehammer directly to the dead center of my chest. The transparent walls of the small office suddenly felt like they were violently collapsing inward, aggressively pressing the limited breathable oxygen right out of the room. My vision blurred darkly and dangerously at the edges, and a loud, high-pitched ringing violently exploded deep inside my ears. My fully paid-off house was my absolute sacred sanctuary. It was the only tangible physical thing of real substantial value I had left in this unpredictable world. My beautiful late wife and I had worked exhausting double shifts, skipped countless family vacations, and aggressively paid down that original heavy mortgage, so I would never have to worry about a secure roof over my head in my vulnerable old age. It was my ultimate, unbreakable safety net. And now a massive, lethal financial anchor had been secretly and maliciously tied directly around my throat. I gripped the padded armrests of the bank chair with such intense, terrifying force that my old joints physically ached with sharp pain. I had to exert every single ounce of veteran firefighting discipline I possessed to actively stop myself from violently flipping the heavy wooden desk completely upside down in a fit of blind rage. I kept my breathing incredibly controlled, kept my voice dangerously flat, and forced a highly artificial, polite smile onto my stiff face. I told Mr. Henderson that my aging memory was not quite what it used to be, and asked if he could please print out the original signed loan documents, just so I could carefully review the final financial terms for my own personal records. He happily obliged, completely unaware that he was literally handing me my own devastating financial death warrant. The large office printer whirred quietly in the corner, dispensing page after page of dense, complex legal banking contracts. Mr. Henderson handed me the thick, warm stack of white papers. I slowly, deliberately turned to the final authorized signature page. Right there, perfectly centered on the bottom black line, was my given name. But the handwriting was absolutely not mine. It was a flawless, highly practiced imitation of my signature, but it completely lacked the heavy physical pressure and the slight leftward slant I always naturally applied to my letters. It was a masterful, highly calculated criminal forgery. But a forged signature alone would absolutely never be enough to successfully secure a massive secondary mortgage without the primary homeowner being physically present inside the bank branch with official identification. I aggressively scanned the attached legal addendums, searching desperately for the specific hidden mechanism my son had used to completely bypass the strict banking security protocols. I found it buried deep in the supplementary background file section. It was a certified, notarized legal copy of a durable financial power of attorney. The sudden, horrifying realization hit me with a sickening wave of profound, absolute nausea. 3 years ago, I had been rushed directly to the hospital emergency room after inhaling a massive, dangerous amount of toxic chemical smoke during a massive industrial warehouse fire. I was intubated and totally unconscious for 3 terrifying, uncertain days. During that incredibly chaotic, frightening time, I had legally granted Cameron a comprehensive, absolute power of attorney so he could pay my urgent medical bills, manage my complex insurance claims, and keep my household running smoothly while I was fighting for my very life in the intensive care unit. When I finally fully recovered and safely returned home, I had simply forgotten to formally legally revoke the emergency document. I had completely blindly trusted my only son with my life and my legacy. Cameron had maliciously and silently kept that absolute legal power sitting quietly in his back pocket, patiently waiting for the absolute perfect opportunity to strike. He had walked right into this very bank branch while I was sitting peacefully unaware on my back porch. He had confidently presented the legally valid power of attorney to the naive loan officers and ruthlessly used it to legally bind his own father to a massive, crippling, unpayable debt. He had literally stolen the very physical roof over my head to generously fund his extravagant downtown love nest. The $200,000 sitting comfortably in his secret corporate LLC account was not stolen from a random wealthy stranger. It was the stolen bleeding equity of my lifelong family home. The sheer terrifying scale of the pure evil required to deliberately commit this specific act was entirely beyond my moral comprehension. A father naturally expects many normal disappointments in life. You fully expect your children to make foolish mistakes, to struggle financially, to occasionally break your heart with their youthful immaturity. But you never, in your darkest nightmares, expect the boy you lovingly raised, the boy you patiently taught to ride a bicycle and proudly threw a baseball with, to meticulously and happily plan your absolute total destruction. He knew exactly what he was doing. He knew for a proven fact that I was living strictly on a highly fixed, limited pension. He clearly knew that attaching a $200,000 loan to my property would eventually inevitably trigger a massive, unavoidable financial default. He fully and maliciously intended to let the bank aggressively foreclose on my home. He was perfectly willing to let me be violently evicted onto the cold street, while he selfishly drank expensive champagne on a warm beach in Miami with a shallow fitness model. The betrayal cut so incredibly deep, it bypassed my aching heart entirely and severed something absolutely fundamental in my soul. My own flesh and blood considered me completely, entirely disposable. I was absolutely nothing to him but a convenient, naive financial resource to be brutally drained and carelessly discarded in the trash. The suffocating, heavy sadness I initially felt for the tragic loss of my son was instantly and completely incinerated by a towering, white-hot, roaring inferno of protective rage. The boy I lovingly raised was officially totally dead to me. The man actively driving that luxury Italian sports car was a highly dangerous parasite, and I was going to systematically crush him into the dirt. Every natural protective instinct honed by decades of fighting violent fires screamed at me to act immediately and aggressively. I wanted to violently slam my heavy fist down onto Mr. Henderson's desk, loudly declare the entire loan a massive fraudulent felony crime, and demand he call the local police detectives this very second. I desperately wanted to see my traitorous son arrested, handcuffed, and thrown into a cold, concrete cell before the winter sun even went down. But the strategic, analytical part of my brain, the seasoned veteran battalion chief, who knew exactly how to properly read a highly volatile, dangerous situation, violently slammed the brakes on my temper. If I officially, and loudly reported the massive criminal forgery to the bank manager right here and now. The immediate consequences would be absolutely catastrophic for the innocent people I desperately needed to protect. The bank would instantly initiate a massive, aggressive internal fraud investigation. They would legally freeze my property assets and potentially begin aggressive foreclosure protocols immediately to completely secure their lost capital. More terrifyingly, the sudden massive legal banking action would immediately trigger an automated alert directly to Cameron. He would instantly know the elaborate hidden game was entirely over. He currently had full, unrestricted access to that secret corporate LLC account and all the stolen cash. He could easily and quickly, digitally, wire the remaining stolen funds to an untraceable offshore account, pack his expensive designer bags, and completely vanish to Miami with his mistress long before the police even issued a formal arrest warrant. If Cameron fled the legal jurisdiction successfully, I would be left completely alone holding a massive, legally binding forged debt that I could never possibly repay in my lifetime. I would absolutely lose my beautiful home. I would end up entirely destitute and homeless, and sweet Chloe and my innocent unborn grandchild would be left permanently trapped in that toxic, mold-infested, freezing slum with absolutely no hope of financial rescue. I simply could not allow my burning emotion to destroy our only tactical advantage. I had to actively fight this raging, invisible fire with absolute, cold, calculated strategy. I carefully, neatly folded the massive stack of forged loan documents and slipped them smoothly into my worn leather briefcase. I looked Mr. Henderson directly in the eye, forced a warm, appreciative smile, and thanked him profusely for his excellent, diligent service. I calmly stood up, shook his hand, and walked slowly out of the bank doors into the freezing, cold winter air. My son foolishly thought he had successfully buried me alive. He did not realize I was bringing a heavy steel shovel to dig my way out and completely bury him instead. I sat alone in the cab of my truck, parked just outside the neighborhood bank, for a very long time. The thick stack of forged loan documents rested heavily on the passenger seat right next to me. $200,000 of stolen equity wrapped tightly around my neck like a suffocating iron chain. My large, calloused hands gripped the leather steering wheel so fiercely that my old joints ached with a sharp shooting pain. For 35 grueling years, I had bravely walked directly into roaring chemical infernos. I had pulled terrified, trapped citizens out of blinding smoke and successfully faced down the absolute worst physical destruction this unpredictable world had to offer. But the raging, invisible fire burning inside my own chest right at that exact moment was significantly hotter and infinitely more dangerous than any blazing structural hazard I had ever encountered in my entire career. My own flesh and blood had maliciously signed my secure life away. He had ruthlessly stolen the safe roof right over my tired head to generously fund a lavish, extravagant fantasy lifestyle with a complete stranger, while his vulnerable, heavily pregnant wife shivered constantly in a toxic, mold-infested slum. I genuinely wanted to put my heavy truck into drive and aggressively accelerate straight downtown. I wanted to violently smash the heavy steel bumper directly through the pristine, polished glass doors of his exclusive luxury high-rise building and drag him out onto the cold, hard street by his expensive, tailored collar. But a seasoned veteran firefighter fundamentally knows without a shadow of a doubt that blind, raging emotion is the quickest, guaranteed way to get yourself and your trusting crew killed. If I exploded right now and angrily confronted him without a solid plan, he would immediately realize his elaborate, massive scam was exposed. He would frantically wire the remaining stolen cash to a highly secure, untraceable offshore banking account. He would quickly pack his designer bags and vanish into the wind, leaving no forwarding address. I would be left completely alone, permanently trapped under a massive unpayable forged bank debt, and sweet, hard-working Chloe would be left destitute, facing the harsh winter with an infant. I had to swallow the bitter, burning taste of my own protective, righteous fury. I had to forcefully make myself play the highly strategic, quiet, long game. Right at that agonizing moment, my cell phone suddenly began vibrating inside my heavy winter jacket pocket. I slowly pulled the device out and looked down at the glowing digital screen. It was Cameron. The sheer, breathtaking audacity of the man making a casual, friendly phone call to the aging father he was actively bankrupting made my stomach churn with intense, sickening nausea. I closed my tired eyes and took a massive, deep, steadying breath to calm my rapidly racing heart. I forced my facial muscles to relax and carefully answered the ringing call. "Hey there, Dad." His voice floated smoothly through the small electronic speaker, sounding incredibly warm and full of manufactured artificial affection. "I know I have been incredibly distant lately, and I am so deeply, genuinely sorry about that. The premium clinic launch has just been an absolute brutal nightmare this entire month." I forced my tight jaw to unclench. I made my deep voice sound incredibly weak, highly naive, and entirely unaware of his massive financial deception. "It is okay, son," I replied softly, keeping my tone perfectly even. "I know you are working incredibly hard to securely provide for your beautiful growing family. How are sweet Chloe and the new baby doing out there in the big, beautiful new house?" He let out a heavy, dramatic, theatrical sigh, flawlessly playing the demanding role of the exhausted, dedicated young father. "They are doing absolutely great, Dad." He lied smoothly, without a single fraction of hesitation. "Chloe is resting comfortably in the beautifully painted new nursery. But honestly, Dad, I am calling you today because I am in a bit of a tight, terrifying financial bind. We had some massive, totally unexpected medical equipment shipping delays, and the aggressive commercial zoning permits completely drained my daily operational cash. I am struggling desperately to comfortably make payroll this upcoming week. I hate to even ask you this terrible favor, but is there any possible way you could front me just a little more money? Just a small, temporary financial loan to help me keep the medical business afloat until the new premium wealthy clients start paying their large bills." The pure, unadulterated evil required to comfortably ask a retired fixed-income old man for more money after already secretly forging a $200,000 massive secondary mortgage against his only paid-off home was entirely beyond my human moral comprehension. He was actively, deliberately trying to violently squeeze the last remaining weak drops of blood from my tired old veins. I bit down hard on the soft inside of my cheek until I vividly tasted warm copper. "I think I can carefully manage to help you out one last time, son," I said, keeping my tone gentle and supportive. "I remembered an old, forgotten life insurance policy I purchased many years ago when you were just a little boy. I can probably cash it out entirely and give you a final, solid, secure check for $50,000. But I want to physically see you and proudly celebrate your hard work. Why do you not come over to my house next week for a nice, quiet, home-cooked family dinner? I will have the money securely waiting for you." The tone of his lying voice instantly brightened with intense, greedy, unhidden excitement. "Oh, Dad, you are an absolute, total lifesaver. You have absolutely no idea how much this generous help means to me right now. I will absolutely, definitely be there next week for dinner. I love you so much, Dad." "I love you too, son," I replied quietly. I slowly pulled the phone away from my ear and deliberately ended the call. The sick, twisted feeling in my heavy gut was totally overwhelming, but the silent trap was officially set. He was going to blindly, eagerly walk right into my familiar dining room, entirely expecting a massive financial payday. He had absolutely no earthly idea he was walking straight into a highly coordinated legal slaughterhouse. Early the very next morning, before the sun had even fully risen over the tall Georgia pine trees, I drove my heavy truck directly downtown to safely meet Sarah at a highly exclusive premium corporate law firm. Sarah had aggressively pulled some major professional strings with her high-level industry contacts to quickly secure a private confidential morning meeting with one of the most ruthless, highly effective fraud attorneys in the entire state. His name was Marcus Vance, but absolutely everyone in the competitive cutthroat financial district simply called him the Shark. He was a sharply dressed, intensely focused older white man who spoke with a cold, terrifying mechanical precision. He did not waste a single second of our expensive time with soft, comforting pleasantries or emotional sympathy. He simply sat rigidly behind his massive, pristine glass desk and methodically reviewed the incredibly thick pile of undeniable evidence Sarah and I presented directly to him. He looked carefully and intensely at the intercepted toll violation, noticed the high-definition cloud photographs of the downtown luxury condominium, the secret LLC banking statements, and finally, the staggering stack of forged home equity loan documents I had manually retrieved from my local neighborhood bank manager. The heavy, oppressive silence in his massive, expensive corner office was deafening as his sharp, analytical, highly trained eyes rapidly connected the complex, hidden digital and paper financial trails. This is absolutely not just a simple, tragic, sad case of a greedy, unfaithful, lying spouse hiding a few spare dollars, Mr. Vance finally said, his deep voice dropping to a dangerously low, highly professional octave. What we are looking at right here, documented on this desk, is highly coordinated, massive felony wire fraud, intentional grand theft, and severe critical elder financial abuse. Your son has meticulously calculated and constructed a highly fragile, illegal corporate house of cards. He used your stolen retirement cash to immediately buy a luxury high-rise property entirely under his mistress's given name to legally shield it completely from his pregnant wife. Then, he maliciously and ruthlessly used a long-revoked medical emergency power of attorney to secretly forge a massive secondary mortgage on your fully paid-off family home. I nodded slowly, leaning heavily forward in my comfortable leather chair, gripping the padded armrests. I need to know exactly how we completely destroy him without him ever seeing the crippling blow coming, I demanded firmly, keeping my voice incredibly steady. If I officially loudly report the massive criminal forgery to the local police detectives right now, he will instantly rapidly drain that secret corporate bank account and flee the state long before the slow investigators even draft a formal arrest warrant. I need my lifelong home equity entirely fully restored to my name, and I need my innocent daughter-in-law completely legally protected from his massive, toxic, overwhelming debt. The tough attorney smiled a very cold, highly predatory, calculating smile. That is exactly the specific reason why you came directly to me, Jerome. We are absolutely not going to loudly knock on the front door to announce our presence. We are going to silently, permanently demolish the entire structural foundation of his fake life while he is sleeping comfortably in his expensive bed. Mr. Vance aggressively laid out a brilliant, highly tactical, overwhelming legal strike. Operating strictly under a heavy veil of absolute total judicial secrecy, he and his aggressive, ruthless legal team would quietly file immediate emergency injunctions in the private complex commercial courts. Because we currently possessed the exact specific banking routing numbers for the secret LLC and the clear, undeniable digital proof of the highly illegal forged signatures, the skilled attorney could legally freeze every single financial asset directly connected to Cameron and his young mistress without ever triggering an automated banking alert to their personal cellular phones. Sarah sat right next to me, furiously taking highly detailed, precise notes on a yellow legal pad. She expertly directed the attorney's sharp attention to the massive incoming wire transfers, showing exactly precisely how the stolen home equity funds had been strategically layered and aggressively washed through the fake shell company. The attorney confirmed with absolute certainty that once the heavy judicial freeze was completely executed, Cameron would essentially be entirely financially paralyzed. He would not be able to successfully withdraw a single solitary penny from the corporate accounts. He would not be able to legally sell or transfer the expensive luxury high-rise condominium, and his expensive high-performance Italian sports car would be entirely heavily locked down by the state. We will have the aggressive judicial orders quietly, completely finalized, and officially fully signed by a highly sympathetic judge by the middle of next week, Mr. Vance assured me with unwavering steel confidence. We will quietly, completely sever his entire financial oxygen supply at the exact source. When you finally sit down for that quiet family dinner, your son will be completely, absolutely bankrupt, and he will not even realize he is already entirely a dead man walking. We had built an impenetrable legal steel cage around my traitorous son, but Sarah was fiercely determined to hammer one final devastating nail into his coffin. She wanted undeniable audio proof of his malicious intentions, just in case he tried to play the innocent victim in family court and falsely claim the financial disaster was simply a naive business mistake. She reached into her own savings and hired a specialized elite private investigator she frequently used for complex corporate espionage cases. The seasoned investigator was incredibly discreet and highly effective. For 3 solid days, he flawlessly shadowed Cameron and his young fitness influencer mistress around the wealthy, crowded downtown financial district. On a warm, busy Saturday evening, he seamlessly managed to secure a small table situated directly next to them on the noisy outdoor patio of an incredibly expensive premium steakhouse. Using a highly advanced directional parabolic microphone securely concealed inside his casual jacket pocket, the investigator perfectly captured a crystal-clear digital audio recording of their private, intimate conversation. Sarah brought the audio file directly to my house late that Sunday evening. We sat silently at my kitchen table and played the crisp recording. The clear sound of my son's arrogant, joyful laughter filled my peaceful home and made my tired, aging blood run cold. "I cannot wait to finally get out of this miserable city," his mistress complained loudly, her voice dripping with shallow entitlement. "When are we leaving for the Miami beach house?" "Just be patient for one more short week, baby," Cameron replied smoothly, cutting into an expensive steak. "I am going to have a final farewell dinner with my naive, trusting old man next week. He stupidly thinks I am severely struggling to make payroll for that fake downtown clinic. He is blindly cashing out his last remaining life insurance policy to willingly hand me another $50,000 in cash. Once that massive check clears the bank, we are officially gone for good. We pack the Maserati and drive straight down to the Florida beach. And what exactly about the heavy mortgage debt and your crying pregnant wife?" the mistress asked casually, entirely devoid of any human empathy. Cameron let out a harsh, incredibly cruel, dark laugh that completely severed the very last remaining fragile shred of fatherly love I held in my aching chest. Let the massive bank aggressively foreclose on the old man's house. He is way too old to fight it in court anyway. And Chloe can figure out how to slowly pay her own miserable, cheap rent. That is absolutely not my daily problem anymore. I am permanently done with both of them. I reached out with a perfectly steady hand and turned off the small digital audio player. The heavy, profound silence in my kitchen was absolute. Any lingering fraction of tragic parental pity I previously felt for my only son was permanently incinerated. I looked directly at Sarah, and she nodded silently back at me. The silent, legal counterattack was flawlessly assembled. The heavy trap was primed, and my lying son was about to walk blindly right into a total, absolute, unyielding slaughter. The week leading up to that highly anticipated family dinner felt exactly like the absolute longest 7 days of my entire 65 years on this earth. I had spent decades as a veteran firefighter, constantly training my mind and my physical body to remain perfectly calm and strictly focused in the absolute center of a roaring, unpredictable, raging inferno. I knew exactly how to consciously control my panicked breathing when the thick, toxic black smoke completely blinded my eyes and the searing, violent heat threatened to melt my heavy protective gear right onto my skin. But absolutely nothing in my long, grueling career could have properly prepared me for the sheer psychological torture of having to smile warmly over the phone while actively speaking to the treacherous, lying son who had maliciously and deliberately burned our family to the ground. Every single morning, I woke up long before the bright Georgia sun had even cleared the tall green pine trees, and I methodically reviewed our flawless legal trap. The aggressive, ruthless judicial injunctions drafted by our highly skilled fraud attorney were already silently and swiftly moving directly through the complex commercial courts, completely permanently freezing the hidden corporate bank accounts and severely legally locking down that expensive, breathtaking, downtown luxury condominium. My treacherous son was already entirely financially paralyzed, and he had absolutely no earthly idea that the massive, heavy steel trap had already violently snapped completely shut around his ankles. To make the grand, elaborate illusion absolutely perfect, I spent that entire quiet Thursday morning meticulously preparing the exact same traditional Southern meal I used to cook for him when he was just a little innocent boy. I wanted the entire house to smell exactly like pure warmth and ultimate safety and unconditional parental love. I slowly roasted a massive, beautiful chicken with fresh crushed rosemary and thick, rich butter. I carefully prepared a heavy cast-iron skillet of sweet golden cornbread, and I stood over the hot stove slowly stirring a massive metal pot of fresh collard greens until the rich, savory, comforting aroma completely filled every single corner of my quiet suburban home. I was methodically setting the perfect stage for his absolute total destruction, but my aching old heart still broke just a tiny fraction of an inch with every single clean ceramic plate I carefully placed on the highly polished wooden dining table. I set 2 elegant settings directly across from each other. But in the heavy dark shadows of the adjacent living room, right outside the warm, inviting glow of the dining chandelier, we had meticulously arranged 3 extra silent chairs. I walked slowly into my quiet, dark study and methodically unlocked the heavy bottom drawer of my massive oak desk. I pulled out a thick, heavy yellow manila envelope that contained every single piece of undeniable physical legal evidence we had aggressively and painstakingly gathered over the last few agonizing, desperate weeks. Inside that heavy envelope was the intercepted official toll violation notice for his ridiculously expensive Italian sports car. There were the high-definition color photographs of him passionately kissing that shallow, selfish fitness influencer inside the massive, glass-walled luxury high-rise. There were the highly detailed corporate bank statements, proving beyond any shadow of a doubt that he had maliciously stolen the $200,000 of hard-earned equity directly from my fully paid-off, lifelong family home. And resting right on the very top of that terrifying mountain of toxic lies was the printed digital audio transcript of him laughing cruelly about happily letting the ruthless bank violently evict his aging father directly onto the freezing cold street. I slowly carried the heavy loaded envelope into the dining room and placed it securely underneath my own wooden chair, completely out of his immediate line of sight. Around 5 o'clock in the late afternoon, the heavy, suffocating silence in my peaceful house was finally violently broken by the loud, crunching sound of heavy, expensive tires slowly pulling into my long gravel driveway. I walked over to the front living room window and gently pulled the fabric curtain back, just a tiny fraction of an inch. A sleek, incredibly expensive, brand new dark blue Maserati rolled aggressively into my modest front yard. The powerful high-performance engine rumbled with a deep, arrogant, terrifying growl before finally being abruptly shut off. I stood completely still and watched my son step out of the expensive luxury vehicle, wearing a flawless, custom-tailored dark designer suit that probably cost significantly more than his pregnant wife earned in an entire brutal month of carrying heavy, dirty dishes at that freezing, rundown roadside diner. He paused to check his solid gold watch, smoothed his expensive silk tie, and walked confidently up my wooden front steps with the arrogant swagger of a man who firmly believed he was the absolute smartest person in the entire world. When I slowly opened the heavy wooden front door, Cameron instantly flashed that bright, perfectly practiced, highly charismatic smile that had successfully, completely fooled absolutely everyone for his entire adult life. He stepped aggressively into the warm entryway and wrapped his strong arms around my tired shoulders, pulling me into a tight, incredibly fake, affectionate embrace. It took every single ounce of veteran discipline I possessed not to violently push him right back out the door and aggressively throw him straight down the hard concrete front steps. I forced my stiff old facial muscles to form a warm, welcoming smile and politely invited him to come inside and sit down comfortably at the beautifully set dining table. He walked through my home with supreme, absolute, unearned confidence, deeply inhaling the rich, delicious smells coming straight from the hot kitchen. He casually tossed his expensive, heavy leather car keys directly onto the polished wooden table and sat down comfortably, looking exactly like a victorious, arrogant king confidently returning to claim his final, massive financial prize. "Dad, this house smells absolutely incredible tonight," he said smoothly, leaning back in the comfortable dining chair and smiling broadly across the table at me. I cannot even begin to tell you how much I desperately needed a quiet, relaxing, home-cooked meal after the absolutely brutal, stressful, exhausting week I just survived at the new medical clinic. The sheer, breathtaking audacity required to sit in my quiet home and effortlessly lie straight to my aging face was genuinely horrifying to witness in person. I poured him a tall glass of ice-cold sweet tea and sat down slowly, deliberately, folding my heavily calloused hands together, resting them quietly on the solid wooden table. I kept my deep voice incredibly soft and intentionally laced with a heavy dose of naive elderly concern. "I know you have been working yourself to the absolute bone lately, son," I said gently. "Building a premium, highly successful business from the ground up is an incredibly exhausting, heavy burden for any young man to carry all by himself. But please tell me, how is sweet Chloe doing tonight? I was genuinely really hoping she might be feeling well enough to join us for this special family dinner. I have not seen her since that terrible rainy Thanksgiving." Cameron did not even flinch or hesitate for a single microscopic fraction of a second. He took a long, casual sip of his sweet tea and let out a heavy, highly theatrical sigh of manufactured, dedicated, husbandly concern. "She is doing absolutely wonderful, Dad. But the third trimester of the pregnancy is just really physically exhausting her fragile body right now." He lied perfectly, without a single stutter or nervous break in his smooth, confident voice. I explicitly told her to just stay safely home tonight and comfortably rest her painfully swollen feet. She is currently curled up on the plush, expensive sofa in our beautiful new living room, safely watching her favorite television shows. I made absolutely sure she was perfectly comfortable and warm before I drove all the way over here to see you. I just really want her to feel entirely secure and highly pampered in our gorgeous new house before the precious baby finally arrives. The incredibly vivid, horrifying memory of sweet, innocent Chloe, shivering violently in that toxic mold-infested, dangerous, freezing slum, violently flashed directly across the very front of my mind. I clearly remembered the painful, raw, red blisters entirely covering her completely exhausted hands, and the deep, dark, bruised circles aggressively haunting her terrified, tired eyes. While he sat right here confidently bragging about a massive, luxurious, imaginary house, his vulnerable pregnant Mase was actively working a brutal, punishing double shift, carrying towering stacks of heavy, greasy ceramic plates just to barely afford a cheap, generic box of infant formula. The blazing, white-hot protective fury completely ignited deep inside my chest, roaring loudly like a massive, uncontained structural fire. That is so incredibly wonderful to hear, son. I replied, keeping my tone perfectly flat and completely emotionally dead. A good, honorable husband always aggressively protects and fiercely cherishes his beautiful growing family. I am so incredibly proud of the solid, successful, wealthy man you have become. Cameron smiled brightly, practically glowing with pure, unadulterated, toxic arrogance. He leaned eagerly forward, resting his elbows heavily on the wooden table, entirely unable to hide the aggressive, greedy financial hunger shining brightly in his dark eyes. Thank you, Dad. That means the absolute world to me. And honestly, I really genuinely cannot thank you enough for helping me out with this final temporary financial hurdle. That $50,000 life insurance check is going to completely save my entire medical business from total ruin. Once I safely deposit those massive funds tomorrow morning, I will finally be entirely caught up on all the heavy commercial payroll, and I can finally start focusing completely on my beautiful family. The heavy, invisible tension in the quiet, peaceful dining room suddenly became so incredibly intensely thick and physically heavy, it felt exactly like the terrifying, suffocating air pressure right before a massive, explosive backdraft violently blows the heavy structural roof completely off a raging, burning building. The complete, absolute silence stretched out for several agonizingly long, incredibly dangerous seconds. I did not immediately reach into my pocket for any imaginary $50,000 check. I did not offer him a warm, reassuring, fatherly smile. I simply sat perfectly rigidly still, staring deeply and intensely, right directly into his lying, arrogant, greedy eyes. What Cameron absolutely did not know, what he could not possibly have anticipated in his wildest, most arrogant, greedy dreams, was that we were absolutely not entirely alone in the house. Standing perfectly still, completely, entirely hidden in the deep, dark shadows of the adjacent living room, barely 10 feet away from where he was confidently sitting, were 3 completely silent, waiting witnesses. Sarah was standing completely silently there, with her sharp, intelligent eyes burning brightly with a cold, terrifying, absolute legal fury, firmly holding a massive, thick stack of finalized, aggressive judicial banking freezing orders. Right next to her stood our ruthless, highly effective fraud attorney, wearing a sharp, pristine dark suit and an expression of pure, absolute, unyielding professional legal destruction. And standing safely, perfectly protected between them, with heavy tears of profound, devastating, absolute heartbreak, streaming silently down her pale, exhausted face, was sweet, pregnant Chloe. She had perfectly heard every single disgusting, elaborate lie that had just confidently rolled right off her treacherous husband's smooth, lying tongue. I slowly, quietly reached my right hand securely under the wooden seat of my dining chair, and my rough, calloused fingers firmly gripped the thick edge of that heavy yellow manila envelope. I pulled it out and deliberately forcefully placed it right dead center on the highly polished dining table directly between our two empty dinner plates. The heavy, loud thud of the thick paper envelope hitting the solid wood sounded exactly like a loud, angry judge aggressively slamming a heavy wooden gavel down onto a solid courtroom block. Cameron looked completely down at the thick, mysterious, heavy envelope with a sudden fleeting flash of genuine, utter, absolute confusion. His perfect, confident, bright smile faltered just a tiny, microscopic fraction of an inch as he slowly, cautiously looked back up directly at my face. He finally instantly noticed the profound, terrifying, unyielding coldness radiating aggressively entirely from my rigid posture. I leaned slowly and tensely forward, very deliberately, bringing my face incredibly uncomfortably close to his, and I asked him the final defining, devastating question that would permanently, violently detonate his entire fake existence. "How is the clinic doing, son? How is the clinic doing, son?" I asked the question with a voice so terrifyingly calm that it barely disturbed the warm, sweet air in the dining room. Cameron did not notice the heavy absolute danger lurking directly beneath my quiet tone. He simply took another long, casual sip of his iced tea and leaned back comfortably in his solid wooden chair. He smiled that incredibly polished, arrogant smile that had successfully deceived everyone for his entire adult life. He launched into a massive, elaborate, highly rehearsed monologue about his imaginary struggles. He confidently told me about the grueling 90-hour work weeks he was supposedly putting in. He painted a vivid, entirely fake picture of himself, tirelessly interviewing new physical therapy assistants, negotiating complex medical supply contracts, and dealing with ruthless commercial landlords. He looked his own father directly in the eyes and effortlessly lied with the smooth, practiced grace of a seasoned career criminal. I sat perfectly still and let him dig his own massive grave. I watched his expensive, custom-tailored suit rest perfectly against his shoulders. I noticed the heavy, solid gold luxury watch gleaming brightly on his left wrist, reflecting the soft yellow light from the dining room chandelier. The rich, comforting smell of the roasted chicken and warm, sweet cornbread. I had spent all morning cooking, filled the house, making the absolute toxicity of his lies feel even more sickening. Every single word that came out of his smiling mouth was a violent physical insult to the memory of my late wife and a direct slap to the face of his heavily pregnant wife, who was currently shivering in the dark shadows just a few feet away. When he finally finished his pathetic fictional speech, he confidently reached his hand out, resting it on the table, fully expecting me to hand him a $50,000 life insurance check. Instead, I reached my large, calloused right hand under the edge of the dining table and firmly gripped the thick, heavy manila folder. I brought it up slowly and placed it squarely in the dead center of the highly polished wooden table. The thick stack of paper hit the solid wood with a heavy, definitive thud that echoed loudly in the quiet room. Cameron looked down at the mysterious yellow envelope with a brief flash of genuine confusion. His perfectly groomed eyebrows furrowed together. He asked me what the folder was, for assuming it was some kind of old insurance documentation or a complex bank form he needed to sign to get his greedy hands on my remaining cash. I did not say a single word. I simply reached forward and slowly, methodically flipped the heavy folder open. I took the very first piece of undeniable paper and slid it directly across the smooth wooden surface until it rested right under his arrogant chin. It was the intercepted automated toll violation notice, clearly displaying the high-resolution photograph of his brand-new luxury Maserati speeding through the expensive downtown express lanes. I watched the initial wave of confusion slowly wash over his smug face as he registered the familiar license plate number. Before he could even open his mouth to formulate a desperate, pathetic excuse, I pulled out the next stack of heavy, glossy paper. I threw down the high-definition color photographs, that Sarah had expertly downloaded directly from his abandoned cloud account. The bright, vivid images violently exposed his entire secret luxury lifestyle. There were pictures of him standing proudly inside that breathtaking, expensive high-rise condominium. There were multiple photographs of him passionately kissing his young, shallow fitness influencer mistress, while holding expensive crystal flutes filled with premium champagne. I watched the warm, confident color violently and rapidly, completely drain right out of my son's face. His tanned skin turned a sickly, pale paper white in a matter of seconds. His arrogant smile completely vanished, replaced instantly by a look of sheer, unadulterated, absolute terror. He stared down at the photographs of his secret mistress, and his jaw physically dropped open. But I was absolutely not finished dismantling his fake life. I reached back into the thick folder and pulled out the highly complex corporate banking statements belonging to his secret LLC. I slapped the dense financial documents directly on top of the photographs. I pointed a heavy calloused finger directly at the massive incoming wire transfer, perfectly matching the exact $150,000 I had originally given him to buy a safe home for his family. I then pulled out the final, absolutely devastating piece of legal paper. It was the heavily stamped, notarized copy of the massive secondary mortgage he had maliciously and secretly forged against my fully paid-off, lifelong family home. I placed the forged signature page directly in front of his shaking hands. The heavy, suffocating silence in the dining room was completely deafening. Cameron sat frozen in his chair, staring blindly at the terrifying mountain of irrefutable legal evidence violently destroying his entire world. His chest began to heave with rapid, panicked breaths. He opened his mouth to speak, but absolutely no sound came out. He looked up at me with wide, terrified eyes, resembling a trapped animal, realizing it had walked blindly directly into a massive, fatal snare. He finally managed to stammer out a weak, broken sentence, desperately claiming that the pictures were completely misunderstood, and that the financial documents were just a temporary, complex business arrangement. I did not let him finish his pathetic string of desperate lies. I sat back in my heavy wooden chair, crossed my arms tightly across my chest, and spoke in a booming, commanding voice that had once successfully directed terrified firefighters through roaring chemical infernos. I told him he did not need to explain his complex business arrangements to me. I told him he needed to explain them to his beautiful, growing family. That was the exact predetermined signal. The heavy dark shadows in the adjacent living room suddenly shifted. The tension in the quiet house skyrocketed to an absolutely razor-sharp, terrifying level as three silent figures slowly stepped directly into the warm yellow glow of the dining room chandelier. Sarah walked out first, holding a thick black leather briefcase, her sharp, intelligent eyes burning with a cold, terrifying, absolute legal fury. Right behind her walked our ruthless, highly effective fraud attorney, wearing a pristine dark suit and an expression of pure, unyielding professional destruction. But the absolute, final, devastating blow to Cameron's collapsing house of cards was the fragile, trembling figure who stepped out last. Chloe walked slowly into the bright light, carrying the heavy physical burden of her third trimester. She was still wearing the faded, exhausted pink uniform dress from that miserable, freezing roadside diner. Her hands were red raw and blistered, and her pale, tired face was entirely stained with heavy tracks of silent, heartbroken tears. Cameron physically recoiled in his dining chair, as if he had just been violently struck by a speeding freight train. He gripped the edge of the wooden table so hard his knuckles turned completely white. He stared at his heavily pregnant wife with a look of absolute sheer impossibility. He had confidently, proudly bragged just 10 minutes ago that he had left her safely resting on a plush, expensive sofa in their beautiful, imaginary four-bedroom estate. Now she was standing directly inside his father's dining room, staring right at the glossy photographs of his secret, wealthy mistress. Cameron frantically jumped up from his chair, knocking it backward onto the hardwood floor. He frantically held his shaking hands up in a desperate, pleading gesture. He took a single, unsteady step toward Chloe, practically begging her to listen to him, swearing blindly that the entire situation was a massive, terrible mistake, taken entirely out of context. Chloe did not cry out or scream or throw anything at him. She simply walked slowly up to the edge of the heavy dining table. She looked directly into the terrified, panicked eyes of the man who had systematically, deliberately tortured and starved her for 6 agonizing months. She reached up with a trembling, raw hand and slowly slid the simple golden wedding band entirely off her left ring finger. She held the metal ring over the polished wood for a single devastating second before simply letting it drop. The small gold band hit the hard wooden table with a sharp, definitive metallic clink that echoed loudly through the completely silent room. She told him in a voice totally devoid of any remaining love or affection that she knew absolutely everything about the toxic mold in the freezing apartment and the stolen retirement money and the expensive downtown love nest. Cameron was completely, entirely hyperventilating now. He turned wildly toward Sarah, begging his sister-in-law to intervene desperately, claiming he was just trying to secure a massive financial future for the new baby. Sarah looked at him with absolute total disgust and firmly told him to save his pathetic, desperate breath for the federal judge. The total, absolute destruction of his massive ego was incredible to witness, but I had one final devastating card to play to completely, permanently incinerate any remaining shred of his false victimhood. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out the small digital audio player the elite private investigator had given us. I placed the small black device gently on the table right next to his discarded wedding ring. I pressed the play button. The crystal-clear, high-definition audio recording from the expensive premium steakhouse patio filled the entire dining room. The sound of Cameron's own arrogant, cruel laughter bounced violently off the walls. Everyone in the room stood perfectly, completely still and listened to him confidently, happily brag to his shallow mistress about taking my final $50,000, packing his luxury Italian sports car, and vanishing permanently to the warm beaches of Miami. The recording captured him explicitly, happily, discussing leaving his heavily pregnant wife, completely destitute, to figure out how to slowly pay her own miserable, cheap rent. It captured him ruthlessly, carelessly, mocking his aging, naive father, and happily declaring he was perfectly, completely willing to let the massive bank aggressively foreclose on my lifelong family home. As the vile, cruel recording finished playing, Cameron slowly sank to his knees, right there on the hard wooden floor. His expensive, custom-tailored suit suddenly looked like a cheap, pathetic Halloween costume. The massive, impenetrable wall of his toxic lies had been completely, violently shattered into a million tiny, unrecoverable pieces. There was absolutely no charming smile or smooth, fabricated excuse that could ever possibly save him from the devastating, irrefutable reality of his own recorded words. Before the suffocating, heavy silence in the dining room could even fully settle, a sudden, brilliant flash of bright, aggressive light violently pierced directly through the sheer curtains of my front window. Rapidly alternating, intense flashes of bright red and blinding blue colors violently painted the dark walls of my peaceful living room. Heavy, authoritative footsteps loudly marched aggressively onto the wooden planks of my front porch, completely shattering the quiet suburban night. I had absolutely not just brought a team of ruthless corporate lawyers to this quiet family dinner. I had brought the full, unyielding, absolute force of the state police. The heavy wooden front door swung wide open, and four heavily armed, uniformed police officers aggressively marched directly into my home. The lead detective, a tall, imposing man with a stern, no-nonsense expression, stepped right into the dining room. Our ruthless fraud attorney calmly stepped forward and handed the lead detective the massive stack of finalized judicial banking injunctions and the confirmed physical evidence of the massive criminal forgery. The detective looked down at the pathetic man, kneeling shaking on my hardwood floor. He loudly officially announced that Cameron was being immediately placed under formal arrest for multiple counts of felony wire fraud, massive criminal forgery, grand theft, and severe critical elder financial abuse. Two strong police officers aggressively hauled my son roughly up by his expensive tailored arms and violently slammed heavy metal handcuffs securely around his wrists. The sharp, metallic click of the heavy steel locking tightly into place was the most incredibly satisfying sound I had ever heard in my entire 65 years on this earth. Cameron entirely broke down. He sobbed uncontrollably, loudly begging and desperately pleading for mercy. He looked frantically directly at me, dragging his heavy feet as the officers pulled him toward the front door. He screamed my name, crying out that he was my only son, that he was incredibly sorry, that he would do absolutely anything to fix the terrible financial mess he had created. I stood perfectly rigidly still, right at the head of my solid wooden dining table. I looked directly into his terrified, panicked eyes, with a gaze as incredibly cold and unyielding as solid, hardened steel. I did not feel a single solitary drop of parental pity or sympathy for the monster standing before me. "You burned down our family son," I said, my deep voice ringing with absolute, final, unbending authority. "Now sit in the ashes." 6 long, agonizing months have slowly and steadily passed since that chaotic, freezing winter evening, when the flashing red and blue lights of the local police cruisers brightly illuminated my quiet suburban street and permanently hauled my traitorous, lying son away into the cold, dark night. The bitter, freezing, unforgiving winter weather has finally completely surrendered to a warm, bright, comforting Georgia spring, and the heavy, suffocating clouds of toxic deception that previously choked every single breath out of my aging lungs have entirely cleared away from our lives forever. The absolute, total destruction of Cameron was a highly methodical and incredibly efficient legal slaughter, perfectly orchestrated by our deeply ruthless and highly effective fraud attorney. When the aggressive federal investigators officially raided his secret corporate business downtown and meticulously uncovered the massive, staggering mountain of undeniable wire fraud, intentional grand theft, and malicious criminal forgery, the stern federal prosecutors offered him absolutely no mercy whatsoever. My son confidently thought he was the smartest, most manipulative man in the entire world, but he rapidly folded like a cheap, flimsy, wet cardboard box the very second they loudly played the crystal-clear digital audio recording of his own cruel, arrogant voice, proudly bragging about his massive financial crimes and his absolute lack of human empathy. The sheer terror in his eyes when he realized his entire fake empire was completely destroyed was a sight I will remember until the day I die. He formally and quickly pleaded guilty to multiple severe federal felony charges to desperately avoid a highly publicized and deeply humiliating public trial that would have completely exposed his disgusting, abusive behavior to the entire city and the national media. Today, he is currently locked securely away, serving a lengthy and highly deserved federal prison sentence. He is wearing a cheap standard-issue scratchy orange uniform inside a highly secure federal correctional facility located very far away from the lavish, extravagant luxury lifestyle he maliciously tried to steal from his own struggling family. There are absolutely no high-end fast Italian sports cars or premium expensive downtown steakhouses where he is going for the next long decade of his ruined life. He has a tiny, cold concrete cell, a hard, narrow, uncomfortable bed, and thousands of long, empty days to sit completely alone in the silent gray ashes of the beautiful, innocent family he deliberately and cruelly burned to the absolute ground. The highly complex, aggressive legal battle to permanently reclaim my stolen financial security was incredibly grueling and mentally exhausting. But we fought back with the absolute, unyielding, terrifying ferocity of a highly protective veteran father fiercely defending his innocent blood from a violent predator. Because we securely possessed the undeniable concrete physical proof of the massive criminal forgery and the highly skilled, relentless legal backing of our aggressive fraud attorney. The local neighborhood bank was legally forced to completely reverse the devastating $200,000 secondary mortgage they had wrongfully and carelessly placed against my fully paid-off property. I will absolutely never, ever forget the profound, overwhelming wave of pure physical relief that violently washed over my tired, old, aching shoulders. The warm, sunny afternoon, the deeply apologetic bank manager personally handed me the official stamped legal documents, formally confirming my lifelong family home was once again entirely clear and completely free of any fraudulent debt. The massive, heavy steel financial anchor that my own trusted flesh and blood had maliciously tied directly around my aging, vulnerable neck was permanently shattered into a million tiny useless pieces and swept away by the winds of hard-fought justice. As for the shallow, incredibly selfish young fitness influencer mistress, she rapidly proved exactly how incredibly fragile and entirely fake their extravagant, toxic romance truly was in harsh reality. The absolute exact second the aggressive federal agents officially completely froze the secret corporate bank accounts and legally physically seized the breathtaking, beautiful luxury high-rise condominium, she frantically packed a single expensive designer travel bag and cowardly fled the city like a terrified wet rat, rapidly abandoning a violently sinking cargo ship. She completely vanished into the anonymous wind, leaving Cameron entirely alone and completely unsupported to face the massive, terrifying legal consequences of his extremely dark financial crimes, all by his pathetic self. The aggressive state authorities swiftly and ruthlessly seized every single physical valuable asset my son had illegally and secretly purchased using my stolen lifelong retirement money. They aggressively liquidated the expensive, high-performance, dark blue Italian sports car, and they legally, publicly auctioned off that massive, pristine downtown luxury condominium to the absolute highest wealthy bidder in the commercial real estate market. The massive, comprehensive legal liquidation process easily fully recovered the entire $150,000 I had originally, willingly, and lovingly given him, returning my hard-earned, lifelong firefighting pension directly back into my highly secure personal savings accounts, where it rightfully belonged. But the absolute sweetest, most deeply satisfying victory of the entire lengthy legal process was the massive financial restitution the stern federal judge fiercely and rightfully ordered for my sweet, innocent daughter-in-law. The remaining massive surplus cash generated from the aggressive corporate asset liquidation was legally and securely transferred directly into a highly secure, independent financial trust fund, explicitly and permanently established for Chloe and my new, innocent grandson, entirely, completely out of Cameron's greedy, manipulative reach forever. The cruel, arrogant monster who deliberately forced his heavily pregnant, vulnerable wife to literally starve and physically suffer in a toxic mold-infested, freezing, dangerous slum, had ultimately been legally forced to completely securely, financially, fund her entire beautiful future and guarantee she would absolutely never, ever have to struggle or suffer for a single basic necessity ever again. The profound, beautiful daily healing process inside my quiet suburban home has been nothing short of an absolute incredible living miracle sent directly from heaven above. Chloe never ever returned to that dangerous, decaying, awful apartment complex for even a single terrifying minute. She lives safely, securely, and incredibly happily right here with me, in my spacious, warm, comfortable house, entirely surrounded by tall, green Georgia pine trees and the quiet, peaceful, relaxing sounds of beautiful nature. The large spare guest bedroom located just down the long wooden hallway was entirely beautifully transformed into a bright, sunny, welcoming nursery room, painted a soft, calming, cheerful yellow color, and completely filled with sturdy, safe, beautiful wooden baby furniture. I proudly and meticulously built entirely with my own 2 tired but willing calloused hands. Just 2 short, wonderful months ago, Chloe safely delivered a beautiful, perfectly healthy, highly energetic, and incredibly strong baby boy with bright, curious, innocent eyes and a loud, demanding cry that fills this old, quiet house with pure, absolute, unadulterated joy every single solitary day. She lovingly and tearfully named him directly after me, and holding little Jerome securely in my large, rough, calloused hands, for the very first time completely and permanently healed the deep, agonizing emotional wounds that my treacherous, lying son had violently inflicted upon my tired, aging heart. Chloe is absolutely no longer the terrified, completely broken, severely exhausted woman I tragically found, carrying towering, dangerous stacks of heavy, greasy ceramic plates at that run-down, freezing, terrible roadside diner during that miserable winter storm. She is resting comfortably every single night, eating highly nutritious, warm, delicious, home-cooked meals, and fully regaining all of the bright, radiant, beautiful, healthy color in her completely relaxed and smiling face. We spend our quiet, peaceful, warm mornings sitting comfortably together on the large wooden back patio, drinking sweet hot tea and happily watching the new, innocent baby peacefully sleep, securely wrapped in soft, clean, warm blankets, while the gentle morning breeze rustles through the tall green trees. I have found an incredible, profound, deep emotional peace in simply being a highly dedicated, loving, and constantly present grandfather to this beautiful, precious child who absolutely deserves the very best this world has to strictly offer. I spent 35 highly demanding and incredibly dangerous years running bravely and selflessly into roaring toxic chemical fires to physically rescue terrified, trapped, helpless strangers. But my absolute greatest and most important rescue of my entire long life was pulling this innocent, sweet woman and my beautiful, vulnerable, defenseless grandson out of the toxic, consuming, invisible fire my own flesh and blood deliberately and maliciously started in the dark. I knowingly and willingly, completely cut my own son out of my life permanently to effectively and permanently stop a highly dangerous, ruthless, deceptive monster, and I would absolutely, without a single fraction of hesitation, do it all over again, 1,000 times, to fiercely protect the innocent people sleeping safely and warmly under my strong, secure roof today. The heavy, dark, dangerous storm has finally completely passed over our tired heads, and the beautiful, bright, warm, healing sun is finally shining brightly on our newly rebuilt and strongly unified family, bringing us the profound peace and true happiness we so desperately earned through our painful tears. The incredibly painful and entirely devastating reality of this entire terrifying ordeal taught me a brutal, highly unforgiving, and absolutely essential life lesson that I desperately need every single person listening to my voice right now to hear and understand perfectly clearly deep within your own hearts. You must never ever blindly trust absolutely anyone with your critical financial security and your vulnerable, unprotected future, not even your own beloved, trusted flesh and blood, who you raised from an innocent child. When it comes to your hard-earned life savings, your secure, valuable property, and your lifelong, hard-won retirement funds, you must always vigorously and relentlessly verify every single legal document and demand absolute, concrete, undeniable proof of every single financial transaction before you ever sign your powerful name on any dotted line. Love is a beautiful, profound, and necessary human gift that brings light into the dark world. But you must absolutely never allow your deep, unconditional parental love to completely, entirely blind your open eyes to the blazing, dangerous red flags frantically waving directly in front of your face, warning you of impending disaster. Do not ever foolishly hand over the precious, secure keys to your entire life without strictly maintaining a solid, impenetrable legal and financial safety net to fiercely protect yourself from the unimaginable darkness and terrible selfish greed that can easily hide directly behind a highly familiar and deeply trusted smiling face. If my incredible story showed you the true, undeniable power of fiercely fighting back against toxic abuse and massive deception, hit that like button right now to strongly support a dedicated grandfather who absolutely refused to be broken or destroyed by a greedy monster. Subscribe to the channel immediately so you absolutely never miss a single powerful real-life story of hard-won justice and ultimate redemption. And please tell me down in the comments exactly what beautiful city you are currently watching this video from, and exactly what time it is there right now. I personally read every single one of your amazing comments, and I absolutely love knowing exactly where my massive, wonderful extended family is tuning in from around this big, beautiful world. Stay incredibly vigilant, protect your loved ones, and God bless you all.